Check, check, microphone check. We are live and giving everyone a chance to pile in. Microphone check. Hello, everybody out there across the plane. All 6 of you watching so far. Hello, hello. I'll just give a couple minutes for more people to pop in. Looking at the chat. Hello, Candy, Joey, Lazy Boy, Joseph, Karen B, and all. Hello, hello, hello. I was just doing sort of a impromptu hangout, sort of like the one I did last time, where maybe do some interaction with the chat audience, and if I could find my phone, maybe take some calls. I'll probably keep this one relatively short, but just wanted to say hello to everyone and just really talk about whatever y'all want to talk about. I see. So who you said earlier, B.O.B. was on TMZ 2 days ago talking about flat Earth. He sucks at making points, but he's good at making music. I didn't see him on that show on TMZ, but yeah, some people are better at arguing for flat Earth than others, but I guess it's a good thing if he's at least raising awareness to it, right? I don't know. It's sort of like the basketball players when they came out as flat earthers, and then, or at least Shaquille O'Neal, and then said it was a big joke. I mean, even that, I'm sure that hurt a lot of people's feelings. It didn't really surprise me, but at least him coming out and saying it originally, perhaps brought some attention to it for at least a few people, you would think. So that could be good, but excuse me 1 second. I had to clear my throat. Hey, David Voy. Hey, everybody popping in. So let's see here. Anything anybody would like to talk about? Pretty much this is an open forum. Just wanted to chat with you guys and see if anybody has anything that they've got questions on, comments, anything that they want to talk about. I'm wide open and pretty much, flat earth related stuff, obviously, but we can branch off into other hot potatoes. Yuck, yuck, yuck. So the last video that I just put out was section 3 of the top 5 reasons the heliocentric team sucks or whatever. But yeah, Mercury's a pretty good piece of evidence against the heliocentric model, of course, because well, it can be seen after sunset. I think that's a really interesting one, and I covered it in pretty good detail in this last video, and then way off into about an hour-long tangent about other things. But hey, you know me. Joey Style, what's next for Flat Earth, John Boy? See here. Well, what's next? Hopefully it would be raising awareness, getting more people to think about this sort of thing, because I think that's the best part about it. Sphere or flat, this phenomenon, especially for the last couple of years, has gotten people to think about things and question reality, and start looking at things like, well, what is the curvature formula for the spherical Earth? Because you'd think that you'd think that we would have learned that sort of thing somewhere in our many years of education, even just the standard education, K through 12 or whatever. You really would. You'd think that would be taught in some geometry course or some physics course, but no. Um, I think they do mention, or it is mentioned throughout our education system, that we're supposedly spinning 1,000 miles an hour near the equator. I think they do own up to that bit of shenanigans, but in terms of at least the curvature, yeah, it's not really taught. So, I just think it's a good thing that people are getting into geometry and physics and questioning these things, even if they aren't coming up with the correct conclusion and becoming a flat earther. At least they're in the process of studying the world around them and trying to at least ask the questions. So that's beautiful, and hopefully that's what's next for flat Earth. Um, so let's see here. Sorry, y'all, just reading through the chatio. I've got stuff in the way from Google. Okay. Talk about the moon. Yeah, I can talk about the moon a little bit. That was sort of the crux of the first part of the series, but the moon's probably one of the most obvious indicators of, again, this isn't necessarily proof of flat Earth, but it's absolute disproof of the heliocentric theory. When you've got the full moon in broad daylight, well, technically it should be under your feet, over almost a quarter million miles under your feet through the Earth. And I've noticed a few times just in the last couple of months where full moon is clearly, plainly visible, way, way, way over the horizon, well after sunrise or well before sunset. And on the other end of that spectrum, you've got the crescent moons, which should strictly be on the day side of the Earth. You've got those often visible hours into the into the night. So if you map this out, it becomes clear that something's wrong here with the heliocentric model. And I haven't heard any arguments against that. You know how usually if you've got a flat Earth argument, you'll get 100 trolls arguing against it, right? And some of their arguments make more sense than others. But in terms of the moon being where it shouldn't, I haven't really heard any arguments against that. So I think that's a really, really good one. And it's something that, it doesn't happen every full moon or every crescent moon, but it happens frequently enough to where, it's physical evidence that we can point to and show people, hey, explain this in your model. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat here sometimes. But yeah, so the moon is another one of those really just excellent indicators of how this whole thing is wrong. And you'd think that astronomers would have figured this thing out by now, that sort of thing, in terms of the phases of the moon or the full moon during the day. But I think that the reason that they never did figure that sort of thing out is because, frankly, they weren't doing their job and they weren't trying to falsify the heliocentric model. Because, frankly, that's what the scientific method involves, is trying to debunk or falsify given models or theoretical models of things, right? And I've said this before, but the process of elimination is probably the best method to discerning the truth. And so if you can eliminate some model or some theoretical idea as incorrect, then you've eliminated, a falsity, and you can sort of focus on other things. But again, astronomers and astrophysicists haven't been doing that. They've been, again, sort of indoctrinated in this religion that is not to be questioned, and they go from there, never thinking to, well, measure for curvature for one thing, and never thinking to measure for the supersonic axial rotation we're supposedly experiencing all the time. And yeah, it's impossible to remain a globe earther once you start to consider these facts. I think I noticed a question, how did the craters happen, and why are they all at 90 degrees? Yeah, that's a good question. And one thing, this was brought up in zetetic astronomy too a long time ago, that we assume that the moon is covered in craters just because it does look sort of, like the surface isn't 100% homogeneous or uniform, and it appears to have craters and things like that, and even with the naked eye, but we really don't know that those are craters. Um, of course, NASA shows us images of fake images of their little model moon or whatever from the 1960s and 70s missions. And yeah, there's lots of craters on the moon. But I don't think that we can use that video evidence from anything from NASA, really. However, assuming a heliocentric model for argument's sake, and assuming the moon does have craters for argument's sake, it really doesn't make any sense, because if they're, well, for one thing, the the face of the moon that we always see, that apparently has most of the craters, because the dark side of the moon, the back half of the moon, appears to be relatively untouched by craters, and so, again, thinking in heliocentric terms, the Earth should act as sort of a meteorite or meteor or asteroid magnet comparatively to the moon, because the Earth is, allegedly so much larger and more massive and gravitationally rich than the moon, theoretically. Then technically, yeah, we should have been right in the pathway of those craters that hit the quote unquote light side of the moon. So it really doesn't make sense in a heliocentric model. Now, I don't claim to know what's on the moon, and it may or may not be craters, but the fact that we do see craters on the, or quote unquote craters on the light side of the moon, to me is yet again another good piece of evidence against the heliocentric premise, because yeah, that those any crater that's hitting that side of the moon would have had to go well, straight through the Earth first, either that or gone above and around the Earth without being sucked into the Earth's quote unquote gravitational field. So yeah, it's a good question, and I think that it is um, it's just another one of those just common sense pieces of evidence against the team heliocentric. And that's, that seems to be the case with everything that you look at. Every last piece of evidence that you look at really does jive with the heliocentric model. And I'm sorry, it really does jive with the flat Earth reality, and doesn't make any sense with the heliocentric model in mind. Oh, it looks like somebody used the super chat. Thank you so much to Truth Seeker. That very, very much appreciated, sir. So I'm looking back to the chat. Oh, hey, Kristen Wolf, long time no see. Hello. Uh, Flat Earth A-hole had debunking moon craters as craters video. That was pretty good. Yeah, I think I saw that, unless it was very, very recent. I watch a lot of FEA stuff. He does great work. Is Eric Dubé gay? I don't know. I don't think so. He seems to have a relationship with his girlfriend over there in Thailand. I have heard rumors, and I'm not one for rumor mills, but I've heard rumors that her father is some sort of high up general in the Taiwanese army or something. I don't know. Could just be a rumor. But I did watch a video or a portion of a video where Eric, she was teaching him what's that martial arts, whatever it's called, Wing Chun, and she was kicking his ass. So I don't know. No, she looked pretty good though with the whole sticky hands things. But no, I don't know. I've heard people say that he did. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. I think that a lot of his videos are good in terms of flat Earth, but I also think that he's done certain things that are a net negative for the flat Earth movement. So, just to give you an example, the whole Hitler thing, love him or hate him, I'm not gonna sit here and express my feelings one way or another for Hitler. But there is certainly a social stigma against Nazism and against Hitler. And so, if you are a very vocal proponent for flat Earth, probably the most popular flat earther, and you tie that to Nazism and Hitler, then bear with me one second. I've got a person in my face trying to get my attention. Hang on. So anyway, the point that I was trying the point that I was trying to make is that if people like, okay, the Eddie Bravo interview, right? Um, if people go and have Eric on their show and he does a great job talking flat Earth, the next thing that people are going to realize is that he's essentially a neo-Nazi, for lack of a better term, and what that does is it discredits. Uh, Sorry, I'm live on the air, guys, and I've got someone in here that refuses to leave me at my peace. So, getting my train of thought back, it's a net negative when people, uh, and again, whether you love Hitler or hate him, if people realize that you're a Hitler supporter and bake Hitler birthday cakes, then what's going to happen is all flat earthers are sort of subconsciously going to be lumped in as, Jew hating, Hitler loving neo Nazis. And, you know, as much great work as one may do for flat earth, that sort of thing just seems to discredit the movement. And there's other things about Hitler and World War II that are very controversial. I mean, it is a controversial subject, and nobody knows for sure. But personally, I've seen some fairly compelling evidence that most of the higher up SS officers were at least partially Jewish. I've heard compelling cases that Hitler himself may have been partially Jewish. And at the end of World War II, the outcome was a lot of rich defense contractors, but also we got the nation state of Israel as a result of that, which is exactly what the Zion elders wanted. And so whether Hitler was used as a tool, or if it just so happened that the Zionist elders got their way in terms of not only getting Israel set up, but also giving Jewish people in Europe a big incentive to want to go to the middle of Palestine to move to escape persecution. So again, not to get off too much on the tangent with Hitler, but I don't think Eric's gay. No, to answer that question, but I do think that by endorsing him, it's almost as if people think that you are also endorsing. Well, let me put it this way: by endorsing his flat Earth work, people will assume that you are also endorsing his views on World War II and certain races of people. One thing that I will say is that Zionism, or more specifically Talmudism, if I'm sure we're all familiar with the Talmud, that's probably the most racist group of people you can imagine. Um, probably more racist than the Nazis, honestly, because they don't just hate one group of people or one ethnic group, but Talmudists hate everyone that isn't Jewish. They call them cattle or goyim, and so there's two sides to every story. I'm not going to say that justifies the so-called Holocaust, although not to label myself as a Holocaust denier. It really does appear that there were circumstances, at the end of World War II that were, sort of twisted around and capitalized on in the media. Okay, DJ Xanis, please explain the South Celestial Pole. That's a good one. I've made a video covering that a little while back. It's called "Impossible Flights and Star Trails, Southern Star Trails Explained." Personally, I think that it's a like the counter rotation of the stars in the southern hemi. I think that is sort of a secondary thing, because if we can prove for sure that the Earth has no curvature, and we can prove for sure that it's not rotating on an axis, then we know that whatever's going on in the South Celestial Pole must be caused by something other than Earth's axial rotation. Now, the North Pole star Polaris is unique in a sense that it does remain fixed central to all the other northern stars from anywhere in the northern hemisphere in the north, and it always remains central to all those other stars. Now, the same cannot be said about any star in the south, or even any point in space in the south. You may see some time lapses that look just like the north from the south, but to me, I believe that those would be forgeries in terms of like the perfect rings around the southern celestial pole. Because if you study south-facing telescopes footage from the southern hemisphere, it really doesn't look anything like what's going on in the north. But again, to me, that's sort of a secondary thing that probably has to do with the atmosphere itself, as well as the magnetosphere itself. I really do, because liquids, the atmosphere behaves as a liquid on the macro level, as well as magnetic fields can play a huge role in inbound light waves. And so I think, that sort of counter rotation has more to do with optical illusion than it does anything else, right? Because again, if the Earth were spinning and had curvature, then it would make perfect sense and we could just say, sure. But since we know that that's not the case, then there must be some other explanation. And from the limited sort of sky watching that I've done of the southern hemisphere facing south towards this alleged south polar area, you just do not have the perfect rings around any single point or any single star as you do in the north. But I think that this is one of those things that would be answered once we get to the point where we're able to freely, survey the far, far southern area, like say the Antarctic. So hopefully that helps. So going back looking at the chat. Yeah, and hi, Candy, I Spy, NASA Lies. Yeah, we didn't do Glowbusters this past weekend for Mother's Day, so yeah, we'll be back on next week. I did see the repost that they did. That was yeah, that was interesting. I think either Bob or Jared posted it. Uh, Nathan Oakley, nah, I'm not talking about Tim Osmond today, unless he's here, and then I'll just boot him. Now it doesn't matter. He'll just log in with another account. Shout out to Louisiana. The chat is poor. Is the chat poor? Is there something wrong with the chat? What's a good way to contact me? I'm actually gonna give out a number here in a minute. I'll take calls here in a little while, but let me go. Let me put this thing down real quick and grab my phone. I had it charging so that hopefully I would be able to use it for this, but now it's no longer on the charger. So let me go find it. I'll be right back. Hold tight, guys. Righto. There we go. So, wow. And the phone that I set to charge 4 hours ago now has 1 bar. So I'm going to put it back on the charger and maybe give it a few minutes before giving out the number to take calls. But I will put that in the chat here in just a minute. Yes, Tim is a lame ass. I agree. I agree. This, oh, okay. Understood. I'm just reading the chat out loud to anybody who's not paying attention, but so with all of that being said, anything else that anybody would like to talk about, or questions, or any conversations? I just got a text from, oh, yes, I will. Yes, I will do that. There we go. Is it 4:20 somewhere? It's almost 4:20, I think, in Mountain Time. So, yeah, almost. South pointing compass. Yeah, there's all regular compasses point north, even in the far southern hemisphere. But then they have specially made southern compasses which point south in the southern hemisphere. But in terms of any normal regular compass, it's always going to point north, which makes a lot of sense in the flat Earth model, or in an azimuthal equidistant projection, if you will, but really doesn't make much sense on a globe, right? Because you'd think that when you're at the equator, if you were to stray just a bit north of the equator, you'd think that the compass would point north. On the other hand, if you're just a bit south of the equator, you'd think that that compass would point south. If we have this sort of ball magnet Earth with, bilateral symmetry, which you would expect. So that's, it's just another one of those pieces of evidence that they still point north. They just flip the arrow. Yeah, probably so. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, it's just one of those yet another thing that when you add it up with all the other stuff, it's like it just becomes more and more obvious by the day. Looking into this now for at least 2 years, a little bit over 2 years, I've been trying really hard, and a lot of other people as well. We've been trying really hard to find evidence to support the spherical Earth, really. And after all this searching, we just keep coming up with more and more evidence that works on a flat Earth and doesn't work at all on a spherical Earth. And, this could be anything from the moon, like we just talked about, the inner solar system, the axial rotation. And, in terms of axial rotation, that's something that I think would be it would be so obvious if we lived on a spinning object standing perpendicular to the axis, while that object is, hauling ass through space at some 66,000 miles an hour. Scientists claim that we don't feel any sort of motion to the Earth because there's no acceleration involved and it's a fixed frame of reference. But, if you're traveling along a curve at a consistent speed, then there's necessarily acceleration involved. It's not like traveling in a train down a perfectly straight track without hitting any bumps. That's a fixed frame of reference. But if that train was, tumbling end over end, going around a curve, then I think you would feel those different accelerations, just like you should on the Earth if it was spinning and orbiting and flying through space. And, it's just one of those things to where I believe that we're forced into believing this stuff so young, simply because any rational adult, if presented with this, later on in life, wouldn't believe it without really hard evidence. However, while we're very young, they just basically tell us this is what it is. You're going to believe this, or you're going to fail and you'll never get out of second grade, right? So, it's forced upon us. And then even once you get into higher education, it isn't discussed. Now, I have spoken with engineers who who claim that the curvature formulas are taught in certain regards during like civil engineering, or I guess it would be civil engineering classes. However, in practice, it's not used. It's taught in theory, but in practice, it's not used. So, just going back to the chat here. I know I missed a bunch that's going by pretty quick now, but oh, somebody's going to see Metallica today. Yeah, I saw them once back in I don't even know, long time ago in Florida. They were pretty good live. Yeah, my name is John Christopoulos. My last name is not TheMorgile. Morgile was just a avatar name that I've been using for a long time. It has no meaning. It's just something I made up. Scotty's Truth says another wave of research could be the long water lines, which have to keep going down. There is water running dozens of miles from a lake to my city's reservoir. The water flows up high. Yeah, I guess I know what you're talking about. Like, for another really good example would be the Roman aqueducts, which the Romans built basically elevated aqueducts that are a constant gradient down towards the cities, where they would power all of the nice, beautiful fountains with little angels peeing in them and fish squirting water out of their mouth, and had running water and even had hot and cold water. The aqueducts that Rome built A lot of them are still intact today. A lot of them still work today, even though they were built thousands of years ago. But the interesting thing is their engineers built this obviously with knowing that the Earth was flat. Um, because if you think about it, if the Earth was a sphere, you couldn't have a gradient, going down towards the cities, a slight gradient over a curved surface. It doesn't work because, if you're standing in the center of, let's just say it's a 10-mile long aqueduct going from a high elevation lake down to a lower elevation city. Well, if you're standing in the middle of that aqueduct, that's only a very slight gradient. Well, according to the ball, you'd be higher up than both points. You'd be higher up than the starting point of the water, and you'd be higher up than the end position of the water. And so what should happen is the water should get to the center of that aqueduct and then start falling back. Some of it would start falling back towards the source, and some of it would start falling towards the city. But since the Earth is flat, then just that minor gradient allows for the water to continuously flow exactly where they wanted it. And again, they engineered these things, obviously, knowing that the Earth was flat. So, how could the Romans have possibly built a working aqueduct thinking that the Earth was flat and then have it work on a spherical Earth? It doesn't jive, logically. So it's pretty safe to say that the Roman architects and engineers knew very well that the Earth was not a spinning sphere. And possibly that's why some of their architecture is such long-lasting. I mean, could you imagine building an aqueduct system that lasted thousands of years? It's pretty amazing. So going back in through the chat, line of sight used for radio telephone during World War II. Yeah, my grandfather was in World War II, and he was an engineer, Army Corps of Engineers. He actually started off in the Army when the Army and the Air Force were still one thing, and so he went in as an officer and was with the sort of Air Force branch of the Army. But then he ended up pretty quickly, when he was active duty in World War II, he was working with the Army Corps of Engineers, and so they would. One of his favorite things to talk about was blowing up the German bridges. They had a lot of fun doing that, and if they had to get their equipment or men across, they would just put up real quick pontoon bridges, which are basically just sort of makeshift, put them up real quick, take them up real down bridges. So that gave the Allies an advantage over the the Germans and whatever. Because we had the ability to move our equipment and resources, and they were crippled. Their infrastructure was crippled. But in terms of the line of sight used for radio, I believe that they were using weather balloons, honestly, because you could set up an array of weather balloons, or at certain intervals, send up weather balloons that have radio signal repeaters or amplifiers or whatever the proper terminology is, but some way to, bounce your radio signal off of something to get a better, a longer range. I think that's possible. But, knowing that the Earth is flat, perhaps they didn't even need to do that. It just seems to me that the atmosphere itself becomes sort of a hindrance to radio frequency waves, especially at lower altitudes, because it's going through the thickest, densest, or most dense part of the atmosphere. And so if you can sort of shortcut that by sending your radio signals up through the thinner and thinner layers of atmosphere, and then bouncing it back down, I suppose you could get a longer, longer radio signal by sort of bypassing the thick lowest portions of the troposphere. But hey, that's just a theory. But I do know that they were sending up weather balloons for sure. And I'm talking about the military during the war. Um, and I don't think they were doing that just to check the weather. I think that they were doing that for multiple reasons, communications reasons, and that very well could be the case. But yeah, they certainly were. Oh, and of course, reconnaissance. I mean, I don't think they had such high definition cameras back then, but perhaps they could have gotten some sort of an idea of enemy troop movements and cavalry and stuff like that from weather balloons. But yeah, good question. Going back to the chat. Should the sun be seen in the northern sky if the earth were flat? Should the sun be seen in the northern sky if the earth were flat? Well, if you are, let's just say you're at the equator during the northern summer, then I would suppose that the sun should be in the northern sky. Or if you're at the Tropic of Cancer during the equinox, then I would say that the sun would be in the northern sky. But if you're north of the tropics, then I don't know, unless there's some heavy duty refraction or something going on. I don't think you should be able to see the sun in the northern sky if you're well north of the tropics. But what do I know? That's a good question. Yes, my YouTube name is TheMorgile, and my real name is John. Just to answer B-boy instructor. Let's see. Earth is flat. Yes, it is, Nick. Okay, Collie Candle should saw the sun high up in the sky this morning, and also half the moon with no shadow. No way that shadow. No way that that shadow be this Earth, as the sun and moon were way out, and any possibility of such a shadow. This is something that a lot of people will get confused, but on both sides. The phases of the moon, according to Lyons, according to the mainstream model, the phases of the moon aren't caused by the Earth's shadow. It's caused by the reflected light of the sun and our position relative to that reflection. They do claim that the lunar eclipses are caused by the Earth, coming in between the sun and the moon. However, your point stands there, because they even have a word for it. It's called a selenelion, when the sun and the moon are visible in the same sky during a total lunar eclipse through the totality of the event. And that right there is a really good piece of evidence that it is not the Earth which is blotting out the light from the sun towards the moon. So yeah, that's a good point. But just a minor correction, that the phases of the moon, they're not claimed to be due to any shadow of the Earth. They say it has to do with where the moon is in its orbit around the Earth relative to the sun. So, like, for example, the no moon phase, and by the phase of the moon, we can tell exactly where it should be according to the heliocentric model. So, like the no moon phase, we know that the moon would be directly aligned to the sun, even if not directly aligned on the ecliptic to cause a solar eclipse. It would be in that exact direction during the no moon phase. On the other hand, during the full moon phase, then the moon should be on the total opposite side of the Earth compared to the sun. Sorry, I got a phone call coming through. I don't know if this is related to this, so let me mute it real quick. Hang on. It is a telemarketer. Let's see if I can get a real person on the phone. It sounds out more. Again, press 1 now to learn about this. All right, here comes my second attempt at Flat Earth telemarketers.
Solar Educational Center, this is Lisa. Who am I speaking with?
Yeah, this is John.
Hi, John. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really wonderful. Thank you so much for asking.
Uh-huh.
Well, my name is Lisa from Solar Educational Center. We have a super amazing, brand new federal funded program for you homeowners in your area. It allows you to completely eliminate your high cost electric bill.
Really?
Yes.
So does this have anything to do with like Nikola Tesla's free energy technology from back in the 40s?
No.
Oh. Did you know that well, are you familiar with cosmology and astronomy?
What is your average monthly electrical bill, and are you a homeowner? I'm working. I'm doing my job. I work for the
Well, you called me.
I know. I want to qualify you as a buyer, as a potential person that could possibly, I'm trying to save you some money.
Well, I want to qualify you as a potential seller. And you did call me.
Think first.
Right.
I know.
So what I'm trying to figure out is if are you familiar?
You a homeowner, yes or no?
Of course.
Okay, so you own a single family resident home. And what is your average electrical bill a month?
Let's see here. Did you know that the Earth is flat and stationary and it's not a spinning sphere?
Did you know that my mother was a Jewish Holocaust survivor?
Really?
Right.
That's
what is your
interesting.
Average monthly electric bill?
I'm really not sure on average, but do you know what the curvature calculation is to determine the vertical descent?
Average monthly bill is. I mean, how can you figure out the Earth if you don't even know what your bill is? I mean, let's be real.
How can I figure out the Earth? No, I'm going to tell you
the. You're intelligent and you're wasting my time.
Wasting your own time. The curvature actually you're being live streamed right now. The curvature calculation is 8 inches per mile squared. And so that means like if a building is 50 miles away and you can see it, it should be over a quarter mile below the horizon. And people are taking photographs all over the world of buildings. I told you guys, if you ever want to get a telemarketer to hang up on you, you just get them start talking about flat Earth. And yes, I noticed that Leanne and G13, she pulled the Jew card. And what was I just saying about the whole Eric Dubé thing? I guess flat Earth has gotten so popular that now flat earthers are a bunch of neo-Nazis, Holocaust deniers. But that was that was just classic. So she wow, she calls me at home. Well, first of all, a robot calls me. Yeah, she must have heard about Eric Dubé. A robot calls me, I press 1, and then she basically starts talking to me, telling me when I have questions for her, that I'm not the one doing the talking. She's in control of this conversation. And yeah, her mother was a Jewish Holocaust survivor. She sounds a little young, don't you? And no offense to Jewish people, my wife's half Jewish, but doesn't it seem like there are a lot of Holocaust survivors? Because I don't know, it just seems like I remember reading in several sources that there weren't even 6 million Jewish people in all of Europe during the Holocaust, yet 6 million of them died in the concentration camps, according to the mainstream narrative. Yet there are just tons and tons and tons of survivors. And again, I'm not trying to downplay what happened during World War II. Jewish people and other races and other sorts of people were put in internment camps or work camps. And I would remind everyone out there that the United States did the exact same thing to our Japanese American citizens at the same sort of time. So, that's part of war. Unfortunately, the government finds it necessary to, you know, have collateral during war, frankly, and it's not a bad strategy if you have some leverage or bargaining chips. Now, I would never lock up people in internment camps or work camps, but of course the governments would. The point is it's not just exclusively the Nazis that did that sort of thing. The United States did the exact same thing. However, let's just say during World War II, when we had all of the Japanese American citizens detained, let's say we would have gotten defeated by Japan and Germany, let's just say, and they overtook our country and destroyed all of our roads, bridges, and rails and supply lines. What do you think would have happened to the Japanese American citizens in those internment camps? Well, they probably wouldn't have been able to replenish their stockpiles of food and medicine and antibiotics, and they may have suffered a similar fate as those who were in the, German work camps. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun. I have found out my new uh, telemarketer deterrent. You just start telling them about flat Earth, and they will totally hang up on you. That is so funny. You know what? They don't have a rebuttal for flat Earth yet, at least not in the sales world. And by the way, if you didn't hear her, she was trying to sell me nuclear power. Nuclear power. Solar power. I must not be with it. Yeah, trying to sell me solar power. And I asked her just a simple question about Nikola Tesla's free energy, and she didn't want to hear about that. That brings up another interesting point. There's what do you call them? Kundalini yoga masters, swamis, whatever. They have a teaching that really sort of makes a lot of sense from a Tesla sort of standpoint, where Tesla knew that we could harvest energy, electricity straight out of the air, and according to these ancient Hindu traditions, they say that we get our body's electrical energy comes from the air itself, just breathing in the air. And that makes a lot of sense. If the air has a negative charge or whatever, and you breathe that in and incorporate that electricity into your body, then perhaps we ourselves are free energy devices. Because if you ask a doctor, a medical doctor, where does our body's electricity come from? They'll tell you that they think it comes from the heart beating, but that doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, how do you get electricity from a muscle contracting and expanding, contracting and expanding? Besides, you need electricity for that to work, right? It's sort of like which came first, the chicken or the egg sort of thing, right? So to me, the ancient stuff, and I've been finding this more and more over the last few years, that ancient knowledge or ancient myths, a lot of times they're so called, make a lot more sense than modern day explanations for things. So, if I had to bet, I would say that we probably do get our electrical energy from the ether itself or from the air, as opposed to electrical energy being a byproduct of our heart pumping. It just makes more sense to me the former way. So, yeah, flat Earth is not a paradigm. Well, I think it kind of could be. I think it probably is like the poster child for a paradigm, right? Because paradigm just sort of means worldview, unless I'm totally off here. And the way you view the world, if you view the world as flat, then technically that's like literally a paradigm, not just a figurative paradigm, right? Globocost survivor. That's funny. Wind. Lazy boy researcher, wind. Yeah, wind energy. Are you talking about wind energy? Yeah. The thing is that's all just I think it's just a ploy. They've been trying to suppress Nikola Tesla's free energy technologies since he came out with them. And so, yeah, it just the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and see Thomas Edison and all those guys. J.P. Morgan was in there. They had a lot at stake. That they wanted to not only be able to sell electricity, something that naturally occurs. That's like, it's almost like trying to sell air. And we're almost there. I mean, they do sell bottled water out of plastic containers, which plastic gives off poisonous chemicals, by the way. But yeah, so they already sell us water. Next thing you know, they're going to sell us air. But yeah, they sell us electricity. And not only do they sell us electricity, but they also make a lot of money on the copper wiring that is used to transmit that. And so, ever since the 20s or 30s or whenever Nikola Tesla came out with his free energy devices, they've been suppressing them, And so these things like solar power and wind power and, hydroelectric power is pretty good. But they're just unnecessary. We should all have our own little Tesla device that we can just sit somewhere near our home and power all our stuff forever. Or power, get a giant Tesla tower device and put one in every town and everybody gets free electricity. But of course, the big corporations wouldn't be able to make a ton of money off of that. So they don't. And they keep charging us more and more. I think my electric company, Duke Energy, and yes, I believe Duke is one of those bloodline Illuminati families. But Duke Energy, I think they just had a 15% increase in electrical costs, not long ago, very recently. And so, yeah, it's just getting more and more expensive to live. And of course, the average wages aren't going up. And if you factor that in with inflation, then, technically our average wages are going down relative to the cost of living. Solar Bic lighter, cold beer, grilling hot dogs and burgers. Let's see here. Tesla shite on Edison, yes. Sorry, guys, just reading through the chat. And I hate how it jumps down. Yeah, Thomas Edison was I don't know how much he had a hand in the shenanigans with like J.P. Morgan and them, but yeah, Edison hired on Tesla, who was obviously much more prolific and genius electrical engineer than Edison himself, and just tried to really just beat Tesla into the mud and used propaganda, and he had the backing of the mainstream media of the time to really stigmatize the Tesla name. In fact, I think they even went to lengths of electrocuting an elephant or multiple elephants in sort of public displays of how dangerous AC current is. But if I'm not mistaken, they were actually using instead of alternating current, which was Tesla's deal, they were actually using direct current, which was Edison's deal. So, yeah, that is pretty much a dick move, right? But flat is the new F word. Yeah, your house is solely run on multiple mice running on wheels, powering electric motors. That would be nice. This new place that I moved into this last week, there is a little field mouse in here. Oh my goodness. They give me the creeps. I had to get some sticky traps. I'm hoping I don't want to kill the darn thing because he is kind of cute. I want to catch him in a sticky trap and then just drop him off down the road somewhere and at least give the little guy a chance, The Elephant Man used direct current. Look what happened there. Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, when when Edison had the elephants killed, he was using direct current, if I'm not mistaken. End the debate. 2017, Million Man March to see the edge. Get a cat like the rest of us. Yeah, I love cats. I've had several cats, and right now I've just got a little retarded dog. And you know, I would like to get a cat, but the litter boxes. Oof. And then of course the cat kills the rat and or mouse or whatever it is, and sets it at the foot of your bed as a gift. Yeah. Yes, Lily is very cute. She's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but she is very cute. So what do I think will happen when the flat Earth reaches the tipping point? Well, I sort of think that it already has to a degree. Um, okay, maybe I'll stay away from the sticky traps if they can't get loose from them. Yeah, I thought that might be a little bit less, or a little bit more humane than a snap trap or poison. I don't know. You really can't get them off there, huh? Wow. What was I saying? Hold on, there was a question here. Oh, what will happen when the flat Earth reaches the tipping point? Yeah, I think it sort of already has, because it is sort of getting it is getting mainstream attention, although it's not exactly getting uh, positive mainstream attention. So, like when someone like Kyrie Irving comes out saying the Earth is flat, and then goes and says things like, "Yeah, but it's not that big of a deal. It's not that important," and doesn't give any evidence to support his claims, then I'm sorry, but that sort of does make the thing look stupid, right? And maybe his heart's in the right place, but then of course you've got Shaquille O'Neal coming out saying that the Earth is flat, and the way he knows is because he drove from coast to coast, and that's sort of a silly argument. And then a couple days later, I don't even think it was a week later, he came out saying that it was just a joke. So, basketball players, probably not professional basketball players anyway, are probably not the best people that we want to have as flat Earth proponents, because, they're not exactly that great at explaining what's going on. I mean, apparently they don't even try to explain it, according to what I've seen. And so, but what happens when it reaches this tipping point? So I don't know, I guess, what do you define as the tipping point? Does the president have to come on the news and say, okay, guys, country, this is a press announcement to let everyone know the Earth is flat and stationary? Well, first of all, I don't think that they would believe him. They'd probably think it was a joke. And I don't know. I don't think it would change anything. But if you consider the tipping point as maybe half the people in the world know the truth, I don't know, what is the tipping point. I think maybe 10% of the people in the world knowing the truth is sort of where the tipping point begins, because then it starts to grow exponentially there. The whole thing about 6 degrees of separation. I don't know how true that is, but the theory is that everybody in the world is connected by 6 acquaintances, right? So I have a friend who has a friend who has a friend who has a friend who has a friend who knows, I don't know, Will Smith, since he was in that movie. Or I have a friend that has a friend that has a friend who knows Donald Trump. And so you've got that whole 6 degrees of separation thing, to where, once an idea or once a truth catches on to a certain critical mass, then, it's really just a matter of time before the tipping point occurs. Now, my theory is, or my prediction is that the powers that ought not be just simply won't allow a complete tipping point or a complete tip in the flat Earth direction to occur, because they're going through the stages of it now where it's being ridiculed and it's being fought against, and eventually it will just be accepted as self-evident, right? So it is going through those stages, but I just believe that I don't know, the powers that ought not be are going to make some moves to ensure that this truth stays as oppressed or as buried as possible. That's just my theory, because they really can't afford to have this whole thing come unhinged right now. Honestly, I'm 100% convinced that the great deception of the spherical Earth, the controlling elite only have garnered their control, or relinquished our control, or we've relinquished our control over to them by believing in this whole godless, soulless universe, which is governed by gravity and chaos. It's that very mindset that leads people away from spirituality. It's that very mindset which leads people towards, transhumanism, and it causes people to flock towards entities like NASA. And, I just see that that they're not going to let this go easily. They need the globe Earth deception in order for their plans, whatever they may be, to come to fruition. And if we can wake enough people up to this truth, then it's not going to have the effect that they desire. And so they may try to speed things up a bit, and technically when that happens, they make big mistakes. So maybe they will do that as well. Going back to the chat, what did someone get an ad? A camera slide, cool products on TheMorgile's ads. Yeah, I don't pick the ads. If there are ads, I didn't realize. Maybe I monetized this. I'm not sure, but yeah, somebody told me one time that they got a NASA ad on one of my videos. So I don't know. Yeah, Chris, Actors Guild, we need to go either to the North Pole or Antarctica. I know the journey is perilous, but it has to happen. Yeah, and I agree, man. And, I don't know if you're in America or whatever country, but, all of us combined, we pay tax for everything. I think some economists who are honest will admit that upwards of 50 to 60% of our money goes to taxes. Whether it's payroll tax, which they're automatically going to get anywhere from 25% to half of your money right there just in payroll tax. But then every dollar you spend, you've got retail tax, then you've got property tax, and you've got, let's see, what else do they tax you on? Your car, your home. They tax you on lots and lots of different things, pretty much everything you can think of. And sorry, I adjusted my chair here. They just can't have us waking up to this, basically, is what I'm getting at here. And the only way that they can tax us to death on everything is if they have us believing that they have our best interests at heart, when in fact all they're doing is building psychological and physical barriers to our progress. So yeah, 60% of what you earn goes back in tax. Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. And, all of this happening in a country where the founding members of the country were running away from a tyrannical government that was basically like, the castes and feudal systems where they were being taxed and having to work tenant farms just to have a place to live, and royalty, just basically raping and pillaging as they wished, doing whatever they wanted, while the average person, the majority of people, were being just totally oppressed and taxed and just treated like garbage. That's one of the biggest reasons, along with Protestantism running away from the evils of the Catholic Church. Those two things were big motivators for the settling of America, and here we are, probably the most heavily taxed people in history, I would imagine. I just don't see. Oh yeah, don't forget cigarette tax. Yeah, I noticed someone that. Yeah, worst tax ever. Exactly. Yeah. Pack of cigarette. Oh, New York City cigarette tax. I went to New York City one time. I took a train up there, and I got off in Grand Central Station, and they've got a lot of shops in there. It's like, so I guess, like sort of like an underground mall as you're leaving, and they've got just regular shops. And it had been a 20-something hour train ride, so I was ready for a pack of smokes and a beer. This was several years ago. I don't really drink much anymore, except on special occasions. But would you believe that it cost me $21 for a pack of cigarettes and a 20-ounce can of beer at Grand Central Station? I was like, wow. But I went ahead and did it because I didn't know anywhere else to go, to go to the store. Um, but then I bumped into some guys from Harlem, and we got on a couple subways and walked right near Central Park, which seemed beautiful, and went up to a very nice. I think it was on the 5th floor of a building in Harlem. And the only thing that I hated about that was they didn't have an elevator. Oh my God. I don't see how you people in New York do it, man, unless you have an elevator. Like, like if you had to go down, let me go grab my coat, or let me go grab a egg roll from the Chinese place downstairs. You literally have to walk down 5 flights of stairs, and then walk up 5 flights of stairs, or 6, or however many. Goodness gracious. Wow, 6.75 a pack in Pennsylvania. I guess I'm pretty lucky in South Carolina. I don't smoke name brands usually. I smoke generics, but I found a generic brand that's pretty good. It's called Eagles for $3.17 a pack. So I guess I won't complain too much on that front. But yeah, the point is they tax you on everything. And really, that's unconstitutional. Income tax or taxes on your labor are unconstitutional. And so, the government has got us all pretty much by the short and curlies, because the taxes come straight out of your paycheck. If you go to the store to buy something, they tack on the taxes. And we never signed up for this, but that is what it is. It's built into the system, and that's what gives them control, is because they have the funds to control people. And of course, the US dollar is a fiat currency. It's not worth the paper that it's printed on, yet people give it value through faith in its value. And I guess it's tied to petroleum, but that's how they get you. They say the love of money is the root of all evil, and I would have to concur. Yeah. So $1.60 back in the 90s. I'm going to back and look at the chat here. Morgile in NYC is like Midnight Cowboy. I don't think I've seen the movie. Honestly, no offense to New Yorkers, but I didn't like it much. It was confusing, very crowded. I'm used to living in the country, and when you get there, well, let's just say to get from Grand Central Station to Harlem, I think we had to get on 2 or 3 different subways. But what was so weird about it to me was you get on one subway, and then you get off of it like after 10 minutes, and then you stand there and wait on another sub and get on that one and get off somewhere else and stand there and wait on another one. I don't understand that. It didn't make sense to me. It's that maybe somebody could explain it. But yeah, crazy city, man. I did have fun. One night we went and saw a live show, and it had some very good talented artists singing and playing instruments and stuff. So I'm sure it's a great city. I went there for a very brief time with low on fundage, and it was not, it wasn't a pleasure trip. It was more of a business trip under duress. And so, yeah. Anyway, the founding fathers warned against any type of centralized international banking cartels. Yes, indeed, they totally did. Unfortunately, I think that we've been sort of bamboozled a little bit in terms of the founding fathers. And I've mentioned this in a few other venues, but there were actually 8 presidents prior to George Washington under the Articles of Confederation during the time when the United States was called the Continental Congress. And yeah, 8 presidents prior to George Washington, and yet we're taught that he was the first. Now, it seems like George Washington may have been the first Freemasonic president, but he certainly was not the first president. And so when you dissect the words Articles of Confederation, well, it has Confederate right in there, right? Which is where, what those 8 presidents prior to George Washington were presiding within, was the Articles of Confederation under the Continental Congress. And the Articles of Confederation, basically, just look at the title of it. They did not want to be under centralized, quote unquote, federal rule. They saw that as a big problem because, frankly, what that meant, becoming, federal, it meant sort of becoming subservient to the crown. And you have characters like Benjamin Franklin, who is the only person on the money supply who was not a president, and he's on the big one. He's on the hundy, the $100 bill, but he wasn't the president, so he's unique in that regard. But one thing that he did do, Benjamin Franklin, was he sort of was a liaison between the fledgling United States and the crown. And I think he may have been among the very first shills in America, right? So I don't know. A lot of people have these very, highly esteemed images in their mind of the founding fathers, but unfortunately, I'm beginning to think otherwise, or I've sort of come over the fence where the people that are credited with being the founding fathers, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and maybe with the exception of a few like Jefferson and whatnot, or Andrew Jackson. Anyway, these guys, seems to me that when they signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they were essentially getting us on the hook with the crown, sort of covertly. I think it was Benjamin Franklin's, one of his famous lines after they got through signing, was it the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution 1? He said, well, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but he said, well, you have your republic now if you can keep it. And, you can read into that what you will, but it sounds to me like the whole thing was set up to fail. And of course, way later on in history, after the Revolutionary War, you had the Civil War, where guess who lost? The Confederates, the guys that didn't want to be centralized and, sort of assimilated into a pyramidal power structure, where you've got the tip-top elites, ruling over and lording over the rest of the people through their whole, pyramid scheme, which is, exactly like the whole setup of royalty. You've got your king at the top, your king's court, down, 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 the pyramid goes till you get at the bottom where you're a shoemaker or a chimney sweeper, and that's what your parents were, that's what your children will be. And so, it was that sort of system that people ran away from and escaped coming to America, only to find that within a few short 100 years, we're pretty much back to exactly the same thing. They obviously don't call politicians royalty, and they give us this illusion that we elect them. But I mean, frankly, anyone that's been paying attention knows that we really don't have a choice. I mean, even if your vote counted, you have to vote on the sort of lesser of two evils in many cases, right? It's funny. I got an automated telemarketing call about 2 weeks ago, and it was a survey. um, I guess it was paid for by Trump. I don't know, but it was a survey asking me about how I felt about certain policies of Trump's. And it would say, press 1 if you agree, press 2 if you disagree. But there was no gray ground, right? There was no, I mean, it was just yes or no questions. And it became really clear to me on that call how they're able to finagle statistics, right? Because let me just give you an example. Like, let's say the question was, press 1 if your favorite food is poop on a stick, and press 2 if your favorite food is poop kebab, right? And obviously they didn't ask this question, but I'm just giving an example. Well, if you don't like either poop on a stick or poop kebab, there was no answer for I do not like either. Right? And so you've got half the country who likes poop on a stick, and the other half the country who likes poop kebab, according to this survey. But there was no third option that, wait a minute, I don't want any poop to eat. And I'm trying to think of an actual example that they gave. One of them had to do with raising the debt ceiling. I do remember that. Pardon me. And so the question was basically, do you support raising the debt ceiling, or do you not support raising the debt ceiling? And my answer was, I support ending the Federal Reserve Bank altogether. But that wasn't an option, of course. Do you see what I'm saying? And so now, because of that sort of survey where you're only limited to a couple of choices and you don't have the ability to actually voice your true opinion, then they get sort of fixed, I don't know, just bogus numbers that are practically meaningless. Because, like I said, a lot of times they give you the choice of two things. You have to choose between the lesser of two evils. And personally, I would go with poop kebab because at least that sounds like it's been seared to perfection and mildly seasoned. Just kidding. So, moving down the chat. Why do you think Harlem produced the Globetrotters? Yeah, it's funny. I've actually, because I grew up when I was younger, I lived in Virginia, and which is obviously very close to DC, and I've actually seen the Globetrotters play live twice, and both times, of course, they played Washington, but it really was fun to watch them play. Those guys are. Well, I don't know who they are now, but when I was younger, the guys were really, really awesome with basketball. And yeah, I had more fun in Harlem than I did anywhere else in New York, to be honest. It seems like the people there were very down to earth, very chill, and awake too. I was very surprised to learn how many people in New York were just totally 9/11 truthers. But I guess it makes sense since they were, there. A lot of them saw the whole thing happen. The whole South wanted to secede. Yeah, the whole South wanted to secede, Simon Lemon, because they did not want to assimilate with this corporatocracy, if you will, which is what we ended up with. And again, prior to the George Washington becoming the first president, we had 8 presidents under the Articles of Confederation, which means that the states wanted to keep their own laws and rights. They didn't want to be lorded over by a centralized hub or a federal centralized hub. And so, frankly, the outcome of the Civil War aside, now I know a lot of people try to, associate the South and the Confederacy with slavery, and that's sort of a stigma that has been purposefully um, attached to the Confederate Army during the Civil War. Is that, oh yeah, they were fighting to keep their slaves, and the North was the good guys because they wanted to do away with slavery. But that's very deceptive, because both the North and the South, rich elitists owned slaves, and Abraham Lincoln was even willing to take slavery off the table if the South would, call a truce. And so it wasn't about slavery. Now, personally, I think slavery is awful. I would never do that to anyone else, and if I saw it happening, I would try to stop it. But the point is that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. It really wasn't. There were lots of other issues, and ultimately what we got was, we have a situation where um, we are now run by a federal government, to where even though the states of Colorado and California and the state of Washington have deemed it legal, just for an example, to grow and recreationally smoke pot, the federal government can still swoop in and shut them down and fine them and put them in prison and all that good stuff, even though it's legal in that state. And so it's hard for, mom and pop businesses in that business to get financing, because it's a very risky loan for any sort of usury lender, which may be a good thing. But, um, you know, those states, Colorado and California, I think there's been a little bit of rhetoric about them wanting to secede, um, because frankly, the federal government, which a lot of people don't know this, but it is a private corporation that is run out of the District of Columbia. It technically doesn't exist on American soil. It's a District of Columbia. And the whole thing with Columbia, I've heard it argued, is sort of synonymous with Lucifer. That may be sort of besides the point, but and people say it's because Christopher Columbus, but his last name wasn't Columbus; it was Cologne. But yeah, so you've got sort of this separate entity that is a corporation, the corporation of the federal government of the United States, uh, ruling over and lording over the population, and through the lesser lords or the state governors and mayors, through essentially what is royal decree. And so whatever our ancestors ran away from in Europe, in the late 1400s, early 1500s, we're basically right back there. Now, they have changed up their MO or their tactics a little bit, to where they're not, so overt about enslaving us. They've sort of tricked us into thinking that we're free. They've tricked us into thinking that we have a choice. But in reality, like we've already discussed, they steal more than half of our income by default, whether it's through income tax, sales tax, property tax. And that's another thing. That America was never supposed to have any taxes either, because that's what happens when you get a centralized government that sets up and allows for centralized banks, like the non-federal, non-reserve bank. They it's a scam. Um, and I believe that the original founding fathers, those 8 presidents prior to Washington, and the original sort of Protestant Christian settlers knew um, what to avoid. But unfortunately, history does repeat itself, and we're now in a position to where probably everybody definitely watching this, maybe everybody alive, there may be a few 104-year-old people out there who were just babies when the Federal Reserve Act was signed. But other than that, we've all known nothing but a centralized Federal Reserve or non-federal, non-reserve bank for our entire lives. And so we assume that it's normal and legitimate. But just because something's been around since before we were born doesn't mean it's legitimate. In fact, it is the antithesis of legitimate. It is a scam. And, JFK, one of his biggest talking points, for better or for worse, was to get rid of the Federal Reserve and get rid of the CIA. And I think the IRS to boot, which makes a lot of sense because the Congress was only supposed to be the one to issue our currency and issue the value thereof, and yet that has been handed off, signed away to private banks who have no sort of allegiance to our country or to our rule of law or even to our best interests. And so, yeah, they're basically siphoning our wealth right out from under our noses legally, and also gaining real property, whether it's houses or businesses or land, by default. And so, the whole American experiment, they say, has failed, but it really wasn't given an honest, fair shake. The American experiment may have worked had it not been for a centralized federal government with all of these outrageous taxes and Illuminati-run compromised individuals at the top. So anyway, poop and custard. Yeah, maybe that's better than shit on a stick. Excuse me. Sorry, just getting back to the chat, guys. And I'll probably start taking calls here in just a minute because we've been going on about an hour and I didn't want to keep this one too long. But let me just get caught up on the chat here. Okay, from Collie Candle. Jeremiah Daniel, yes, taxation is theft. That is indeed true. The filthy royal retards of Britain have never relinquished their reptilian hold on America. Yeah, I agree. Flat Earth photography captured by the moon changing configuration like I did. Probably others as well. Now, in terms of, I think you mean like the moon sort of turning like a wheel as it goes through the night sky. Yeah, it's very interesting. Very, very interesting indeed. This is Nathan Oakley. What's up, Nathan? They played the Star Wars music from the MAR scene, the Team America bar scene. It's geeky. It's so geeky. It's cool. Yeah, Team America. I haven't seen that in a long time. I watched it years ago, and I don't know. It had its moments for sure. Maybe I'd have to wait. Maybe I'd have to watch it at 4:30. So Martin Lidke is half 100, so you're semi-ancient. Indeed. No, I'm kidding. You look good for half 100, man. Elaine Kane, yep, unconstitutional and criminal. Yeah, Ian Tinsley, strange that the Titanic sunk just before. Yeah, I think the Titanic sunk, what was it, 6 months before the signing of the Federal Reserve Act on Jekyll Island, Georgia? Something like that, right? And if I'm not mistaken, the Titanic sunk on tax day, right? April 15th. And what's really interesting about it, I have done a video on this. It was part of the series I did a long time ago. What was the name of that series that I did? Flat Earth, but I digress, I believe. Yeah, I go into the Titanic there. But yeah, it seems like it wasn't even the Titanic that was sunk. It was an insurance scam. I believe that it was actually the Olympic. They figured it out that was sunk, which was an older ship that was fixing to be decommissioned, and it was sort of dressed up to look like the Titanic just before its quote unquote virgin voyage. And the claim is that it was sunk on purpose in order to kill off um, very rich and influential people who may have been an obstacle to the Federal Reserve Act. So by the way, J.P. Morgan, his name comes up all the time in these sort of discussions, but J.P. Morgan was directly responsible for making the VIP guest list on the Titanic's maiden voyage. So you had people like the Astors and the Guggenheims and others who may have been able to at least delay or stop the fraudulent, illegal Federal Reserve Act during Christmas holiday in 1913, I want to say. Wait a minute, is that right? Yeah, 1913. If I'm off on my dates, whatever, shoot me. But yeah, the J.P. Morgan was involved in the VIP guest list of the Titanic, and it brings up sort of I don't know, a theory I have about 9/11. You've got lots of people who sorry, I'm trying to read the chats here. I got something on Facebook. Dustin's on the Hangout. When I talked a couple weeks ago on the phone, I asked what your thoughts were. Up, and I just lost it. It disappeared. Anyway, in terms of 9/11, there's lots of people who claim that nobody died in the buildings of 9/11. There were no planes, which I can get on board with possibly no planes, that there may have been missiles and explosives inside, or maybe even more bizarre things like Dr. Judy Wood's theories. But we know for sure that there were no planes that hit the Pentagon, and it really looks as if the planes in the famous Twin Towers footage were sort of edited in later, because last time I checked, aluminum an aluminum plane is not going to go slap through reinforced steel, right? That would be like a June bug hitting your car windshield and going straight through the car windshield, right? So yeah, that doesn't make much sense. But the point is to the people that say that nobody died on 9/11 in the Twin Towers, logistically, I just don't think that that's even possible. Really, I don't. Because if you've ever been to New York and seen the Twin Towers at 9 o'clock what was it, a Monday morning, I guess, whatever, weekday morning, probably hell even on the weekends, that is a very, very, very busy place with thousands and thousands of people coming in and out of it. And to me, it would make more sense that, much like the Titanic, where J.P. Morgan made a VIP guest list for people to be on the Titanic, I would not be surprised to find that there was a VIP guest list for breakfast at the top of the tower. And by the way, it was 9/11, which was the day that the sort of ribbon cutting ceremony was done. That's when they started officially construction of the Twin Towers, was on 9/11. So they could have, had this whole ruse that it's the whatever year anniversary of the original building of the World Trade Center, and invited key players to breakfast at the top floor. And next thing you know, you've just eliminated anybody who may have gotten in the way of things like the Patriot Act or the consolidation of our world markets into the hands of a few computers, which is exactly what happened. I've talked to day traders who used to work, on the floors in the towers, and they're out of jobs now, because what used to take 50 or 100 day traders showing up to work there, now is done by one computer programmer. All of this trading is done by computers. And it seems to me that 9/11 was the catalyzing event that PNAC wanted in order to catapult us into perpetual, never-ending, all-out total war, as well as do away with the human aspect of our economy in terms of Wall Street. If you can call some Wall Street traders human, but certainly any Wall Street trader is more human than a computer, which is what does a lot of the trading now automatically. So I guess the point is, not to go off on the 9/11 tangent, but I wasn't there. I don't know how many people died that day. But for people to claim that nobody died that day, statistically, I just think that's impossible. Statistically, I think it's impossible that, you know, less than 1,000 people died that day just because of how busy and, you know, compact, tightly packed full of people those towers are. So to me, it makes more sense that yes, people died that day, but key people, specific people that may have been invited there that day specifically for that reason, and you have other people like the owner of the tower, whatever the heck his name is, and his children conspicuously absent from work that day. So yeah, enough about the Twin Towers for now. Scrolling on down. Yes, Sylvie Lohome. I don't understand how the Federal Reserve is allowed to exist either. I don't, and that to me that was one of the biggest indicators when all of the alternative media sources were talking about how Trump is a man of the people and he's going to change things. I mean, really, though, we've all heard campaign promises for as long as we've been paying attention to politics. And, I'm sorry, but campaign promises are basically like, I don't know. You might as well just assume to play it safe that they've always got their fingers crossed behind their backs, because any campaign promises I've ever seen are usually, not delivered on or are sort of messed up in the process. Like, the whole thing with Obamacare, people wanted, the majority of people wanted universal or single payer universal health care. And what we got was Obamacare, which was a bill that nobody even read until after it was passed. So, to me, it's just it's ridiculous how entities like the Federal Reserve, who are obviously just out there essentially pillaging our wealth from within, not having any sort of blowback, or not having any sort of challenge from the people or the government. And yet we keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing money from these people, and the interest just continues to inflate. And in fact, our income taxes don't even cover the interest on this stuff. I mean, this is the most ridiculous way to run an economy. Why would we ever do that? Of course, they trick their way into this position by first engineering the Great Depression and then acting as the knight in shining armor to save America from the Great Depression that they created, only to position themselves as the sole, the sole group responsible for issuing the currency and controlling the value thereof. And as unconstitutional and as immoral as that is, it's been around our whole lives. So, sort of subconsciously, why would we ever think to change it? And, quite frankly, of course, the answer to that is most people have no idea where our money comes from or how this whole thing's work. This whole thing works. When I first found out about the Fed and how it worked, I didn't get it. I didn't understand what was going on. I had to go through it a few times because, I mean, it really is such a simple thing, but it's just unfathomable that they're allowed to exist and do that. So yeah, I totally agree. So, authentic intent. This July 4th, 2017, all Americans should take out 70% of our money from the banks to declare independence. Yes, that might be a good idea. Now, if I were to take 70% of my money out of the bank, then I would have negative 30% of my money in the bank. I don't keep money in the bank. I really don't. I don't even think if I had excess money, I would keep it in a bank. I would probably invest it in things that are easily liquefiable or liquidated. Liquefiable. Yeah, things that are easily liquidated and hold intrinsic value. Because eventually it's just a matter of time before the US dollar falls. I'm not trying to be doomy and gloomy, but fiat currencies fail. That's what they do. The dollar itself has been inflated pretty much out of existence, and so it's really just a matter of time before the whole thing fails. And I think the more people that are awake to the fact that money is a spell, it is worth nothing, and it is us, the people, that are worth something, and it is us, the people, that give the money its worth, then perhaps if enough people wake up to that, then we'll realize that we don't need a Federal Reserve Bank. We don't need fiat currency. Sure, a large economy does need a currency so that you can have exchange of goods and services, right? So like if I raise chickens and you raise cows, and maybe I'm in the mood for steak and milk and you're in the mood for chicken and eggs, then we could trade, but obviously one chicken is not worth one cow. So maybe we'd have to do, I don't know, 25 and a half chickens for a cow and a half. But right, so you can't necessarily cut these animals in half and have them still lay eggs and give milk. So that's where currency comes in. It is a necessary thing for an economy. The problem with currency comes into play when you have these useless eaters, these ticks on the ass of the people, known as the Federal Reserve Bank and most government bodies, who make sure that we continue to work harder and harder for less and less. And eventually, when that bubble bursts, they're going to have all of their ducks in a row. They'll have physical assets. And, that's all fine and dandy for them, because many of us out there, I mean, if you're a Christian, you know what I mean, but material things of this world are inconsequential. They're irrelevant. Sure, they may make the ride a bit easier at times, but at the end of the day, you're not, nobody, me, you, nobody, none of us are taking our cars or our properties or our money over to the next side. It's not going to happen. It's not going to do you any good over there. And so the joke, I believe, really truly is on they who, like the Federal Reserve, make their living off of scamming people and ruining the economy of an entire nation, which they're doing a real good job of it. If you look at a growth chart or a value chart of the United States dollar since 1900, at the point in 1913 when the Federal Reserve Act was signed, you pretty much have a beeline straight to the bottom in terms of the value of our dollar, and a beeline straight to the top in terms of a representation of inflation. So, I've said this before, but at the very best, the Federal Reserve is it's an utter failure. That's at best. And at worst, they're the absolutely the worst domestic enemy the country has ever faced, because they're literally like a parasite, like living inside of us, sucking the lifeblood out of people through money. Now, I'm not saying that money is the lifeblood of people, but our blood, sweat, and tears go into earning those little worthless pieces of paper, so they do represent that value of our work and our worth and our property. They are representative of that. However, they are not that value. And so by siphoning the representation of our worth away from us through these fiat currency scams, they are essentially the worst kind of parasite. It's almost like spiritual cannibalism, is one way to put it. So, yeah, that's probably a good way to put it. Not, enough about that, though. Enough said on that. Name issues when the government hasn't lied. Shorter list when they have. Yeah, so yeah, I've got a list of every time the government didn't lie, and that was it. That was the list. It was a very short list. Yeah, they lie about lots and lots and lots of things. Everything from moon landings to the validity of the Federal Reserve. And I think the whole point I sort of got off on that tangent is that any hopes I may have had for Donald Trump as president sort of went away when he is just allowing basically ExxonMobil and Goldman Sachs to run the country, and allows the Federal Reserve and the IRS to continue, as well as the CIA. And maybe this is sort of a charged topic, but maybe we can talk a little bit about James Comey, the former FBI director that Trump just fired. I've heard some interesting theories in terms of that. But let me catch up on Trump and just put a note in the chat if you want to talk about Comey. But Ginger Sugarbush 905 says at Terry Elrod, yeah, how can the walls be there but be the inside be hollowed out? It's crazy. No one talks about it. Huh. I'm sorry, I missed the context. It costs 13 cents to produce $100 bill. Yeah, I believe that. I believe it. Yesterday, Jupiter Smith Music, yesterday the world debt was 70 trillion. I wonder who we owe it to. Now, are you talking about the United States debt or the world debt? If you're talking about the world debt, like the money that everybody owes to, yeah, that's a good question. I guess they owe it to Lucifer. I don't know, but yeah, you can't create wealth out of imaginary prospecting or interest or tax. Wealth is not created by speculation and futures betting, if you will. The only way that wealth can actually be created is if some real goods or property or something tangible is created, or some service rendered. But even services rendered doesn't really create wealth. It's just redistributing it. So most of the U.S. economy is based on hypotheticals, hence the hyperinflation. So if a house is worth $100,000 in 1980, and say in 2005 it was worth $250,000, where did that money come from? There is no money, didn't come from anywhere. It's just speculation. It's hypothetical. And when you have an economy that's based on that sort of thing and interest, it's eventually bound to fail, especially when it's a fiat currency. But yeah, that's a funny question. If you did mean world debt was 70 trillion, if you're talking about the U.S. debt, 70 trillion sounds high. So maybe you were talking about the world debt, but who do we owe the money to in terms of the U.S. debt, I would say that's probably the Chinese, and I'm sure they'll get every penny of it. And maybe we can pay them in sand dollars. The Martin Ledke, hey Martin, it says it's the crazy Fed Reserve dishing the dough. Yeah. Trump is not perfect. This is awakened mind, but think of what the alternative would have been. Hillary. Yeah, and that's I get your point, but that's exactly what I was saying about the whole survey I got the other day. Like, right? So which would you prefer? Would you prefer poop on a stick or poop kebab? And you have to vote on one or the other. Well, obviously, I'm glad that my poop was at least cooked on the skewer and seasoned a little bit. So I'm so glad we got the poop kebab instead of the poop on a stick. And I gave Trump the benefit of the doubt because he was portrayed as anti-establishment somehow, even though he's been rubbing elbows with the establishment for the last, my whole life. And, somebody that gets to the level of Trump, unfortunately, is going to be compromised by default. We all know that Trump has he's got an eye for the ladies, likes them young. Not sure how young, but I have seen some pretty compelling allegations that he took the Lolita Express to Pedophile Island a few times and has some relations with whoever the hell that guy is who runs Lolita Express and Pedophile Island. And I don't know. I'm not going to come out and say that Trump is a pedophile, but let's just say hypothetically there were compromising pictures of Trump doing or videos of Trump doing something, then he's on the hook. He's controlled. And maybe it's something that he didn't even intend to do. I forget what it's called, but there's this South American, I think it comes from South America, substance where it's ground into a fine powder, and if one of these people blows this powder in your face, pretty much instantly you will be very suggestible. So that person who blew this powder in your face, I wish I could think of the name of it off the top of my head, but they can suggest that you empty out your entire bank and give them all your money, and you'll do it. And they'll tell you to give you the keys to their car, to give you the keys to your car. Wait a minute, I'm saying this wrong again. Goodness gracious. They will tell you to give them the keys to your car. Thank you. Goodness. And you'll do it. They'll tell you to let them into your house and make them a pot roast, and you'll do it. They could probably tell you to jump off a bridge, and you would do it. And under the influence of this drug, that's, again, I think it's found in South America, you will do all that stuff, and the next day you won't remember anything. None of it. I think Vice did a story on it, if I'm not mistaken. It's pretty interesting stuff, pretty scary. But, let's just say hypothetically, a politician or a person in power was under the influence of such a thing. They could be compelled to do something that they normally wouldn't do, and that something gets filmed, and next thing you know, somebody who was squeaky clean and independent is now on the hook with, blackmail. So something like that could happen, even if Trump's intentions were pure. But, I've been on this world long enough to know that Donald Trump is not a man of the people. He's not anti-establishment. And frankly, I just don't see how anyone who has $36 billion in the bank could ever relate to the normal average American. We live in different worlds, truly. We all most of us grew up on either nothing or boxed generic cereal for breakfast. Donald Trump grew up eating gold bars for breakfast. So, there's a little bit of a difference. And I'm just very surprised that the mainstream media was able to fool people into thinking that he was anti-establishment. And you still have all these alt-right. Alex Jones is a big one. When Alex Jones had been saying for years that the whole Republican Democrat thing was a false dichotomy. It's Hegelian dialectic. It's used to divide and conquer us. And then as soon as Trump gets, on the ballot, well, all of that changes somehow. And now it's Trump, 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 Trump. And a lot of people fell for that. I mean, there were a lot of independent journalists whom I really respected, and they all sort of jumped on this Trump bandwagon, I think simply because the mainstream media and the Republican Party abandoned him. Yeah, we need to go back to the barter system. That's a good point. Although that can get sort of messy if I owe you a half a chicken, or maybe you could just come over for chicken stew. I make a pretty good chicken stew. Yeah, devil's breath. Thank you. The stuff that you blow in people's face. Thank you. Authentic intent. It's called devil's breath or scopolamine, found in Colombia. Yes, South America. Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. It's wow. I mean, could you imagine just being at someone's compulsion for, I think it's like last 24 hours or days? Came home after eating a turd sandwich. I can't remember the next day, etc. Yeah. So let's see here. Going back to the chat. Obama grew up modest. We know how that turned out. I don't know about that. We really don't know who Obama was when he grew up. Some claim that his father was Barry Soetoro. Others claim it was some other guy. Nobody really knows who his mom is. I think his wife's a man. I'm like 99% sure Michelle Obama is a dude. I'm sorry, not a dude. He is a transgender individual. Let's be politically correct here. I wouldn't want to be accused of any microaggressions. Scotland and Ireland are waking up. Indeed, indeed they are. Friend of the show, Dell, from over at Beyond the Imaginary Curve, is doing a great job over there. I think he's in Scotland, and if I'm wrong, then sorry about that, but I think he's in Scotland. Did I have cereal? Lucky? Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, no, there were days when, I had to fend for myself a lot growing up when, there may not even have been cereal. So, yeah, rich people and poor people come from different worlds. But the thing is it didn't have to be that way. This whole division of wealth definitely comes from the system itself. It's rigged that way. And again, we're definitely back to a royalty system, although it's just masquerading as a capitalist or a democratic system, when technically we should be a republic. Baptist Dave, Morgile, can you please explain the Southern Stars? Is there a Southern Pole Star? Yeah, and I already touched on this one in this video. First of all, no, there is no Southern Pole Star. And also there is no single point in the south that remains stationary, according to an observer in the Southern Hemisphere. Even if there were, however, what my point on that is the Earth discernibly and measurably does not have curvature. Also, the Earth discernibly and measurably is not rotating nor orbiting. Therefore, the celestial lights are secondary and sort of insignificant because in that regard, because in order to say, let's just say hypothetically that there is a perfect point in the southern sky, like in the northern where Polaris is, even if that was the case, you would still need to prove curvature and axial rotation in order to have that, be a proof or a supporting piece of evidence for the globe. But for brevity's sake, and again, I did cover it earlier, check out a video I did recently. It's called Flat Earth Impossible Flights and Southern Star Trails Explained. I've got some theories on that, and I think a lot of it has to do with the atmosphere and the magnetic field of the Earth. In terms of the magnetic field, what we've got is a magnetic vortex in the central north, sort of humoring an AE projection. And if whatever direction the magnetic vortex is spinning in the north, in the center, say it's clockwise, then the periphery of that magnetic field, it would be sort of a toroid shape, or like, a half a donut. The periphery would be spinning in the opposite direction, or rotating in the opposite direction as the centrifugal force, or the centrifugal direction of the magnetic vortex. And so that may have something to do with the counter rotation of the southern stars. Also, you may be dealing with an inversion in terms of the atmosphere behaving as a liquid on the macroscopic level, or a combination of these things. But again, before we can really go into celestial lights and try to use those as proof of one thing or another, and I know that there's a lot of globe heads out there who are using this so-called Southern Cross area as proof of a spinning spherical Earth. But again, my short answer to that is, without curvature or axial rotation, then the Earth categorically could not possibly be a spinning sphere. So that's sort of my stand on that. I guess another way to put it is, there are natural factors that may allow for counter rotation of the southern stars. Although, if you study time-lapse footage of the big, really, really super expensive professional telescopes facing south from the southern hemisphere, you really don't have this single central point that you do in the north. So there is a difference. So I hope that helps, and definitely check out Flat Earth Impossible Flights and Southern Star Trails Explained. I put it up maybe a couple months ago, I think. Volcanous sand is good for bounding. The Romans used it, and their shit's still up. Yeah, I mean, can you believe it? Like, the Roman aqueducts, thousands of years, still stand. Some of them still work, and some of them are still in use. Wow, it's just amazing. So, Rem R15, Trump is a true American. Well, perhaps. However, even if he is, the deep state is going on with their long-term war plans, just as they were prior to Trump, and just as they would have been should Hillary have gotten into office. That's my point. The whole Republican and Democrat, or one candidate versus the other, is really quite silly, and it makes us easily manipulated, because frankly, you've got just too many people in place, Comey or no Comey. There's too many people in place to where one single person, even the president, even if they are a well-meaning, decent, normal person, really can't do a whole lot to change the system. And that is proof positive by the fact that Trump has already been bombing Yemen, the South Arabian Peninsula, and all of this war rhetoric with North Korea. And whether Trump is a part of this or not, I don't know. But I guess what my point is even if you put, I don't know, who's a person that would be an excellent president, even if you put the best possible president ever in the White House, the system is too deep. It's too deeply rooted. It's too complex in order for any one person to really do anything. And in terms of Trump draining the swamp, I mean, that's just ridiculous because, I mean, look who he's put in his cabinet positions. The ex-CEO of ExxonMobil, Monsanto CEOs, uh, Jared Kushner. I don't know. To me, I gave Trump the benefit of the doubt for a certain time, but any semblance I might have had for respect or hope for him being a decent president with the best intentions are gone. And even if he is the best president with the best intentions, the point is that he's not going to be able to stop the war machine. And in fact, I think that he would prefer to see stocks go up in defense contractors because that's good for the economy. And if the economy goes up while he's president, then that's good for him. So, awaken mind, good points, but don't forget more TPP. I don't know. What is TPP? I'm not sure what that means. I'm sorry. Is that like OPP? I pay you $100 if you gurgle national anthem with Drano. Huh. Well, if I'm not sure if the live stream is down or not. Sorry, I'm getting a. No, it looks like the live stream's still up. Okay, good. So yeah, no, actually, that's kind of not funny. One day I was flipping through the channel years ago, and this guy was on Oprah. He tried to kill himself by drinking a bottle of liquid Drano, and he lived, and he was in really really bad shape. So yeah, I think it would take a lot more than $100 to gargle the national anthem with Drano. Wotan, sorry if I skipped any. Wotan Sauron, the Morgile, I have proof the earth cannot be infinite and it's not from the Bible. How can I reach you? I need more than 200 characters to explain it. Okay, well, let's just do this. I'll go ahead and open up the phones. If anybody has any questions they want to ask me verbally, I'll go ahead and take a few calls. Before I do, I'm going to run into the other room, take a quick break. I've got to see a man about a dog. And I'll give out the number to call in just a second. So just pretend I'm playing hold music, and I'll be right back, guys. Just give me a couple minutes, and then I'll take your calls. Okay, I am back. Sorry about that. Had to go run into the other room. And the cue elevator music. And before I give out the phone number to call, because I'd like to let that phone charge another minute, because it's I have to put it on speaker, and the battery seems to drain pretty quick like that. But I don't know if you guys watched my entire latest video, but the other day I was just perusing YouTube, and I noticed that PewDiePie was live streaming. And so I figured I'd see what all the fuss was about, because there were 26,000 people watching. I was like, wow, that is a lot of people watching. And he was playing a video game, Prey 3, which I have played part 1 years ago, and it was pretty good and all. And from what I saw of it, Prey 3 looked pretty good. But he was literally getting, with the whole super chat thing, he was getting $100 after $100 after $100 after $100, contributions from the viewers. And I was like, wow. Because I get a lot of crap from a lot of different people for opening up crowdsourcing avenues, like fan funding, which YouTube did away with. I do have super chat activated, and somebody actually used it today, so I know that it works. So thanks so much again for that. But I get a lot of flack, and flat earthers in general get a lot of flack for opening up channels of community support. And yet, the biggest channel on YouTube, PewDiePie, with over 55 million subscribers, doesn't seem like anybody complains about him crowdsourcing. So there is certainly a double standard. I don't know. I just for some reason thought about that before I wanted to give out the number. But thanks again to I forget who it was now. I'd have to scroll way back up. You know how fast this thing goes. But thank you guys, or thank whomever, for the super chat contribution. So I know that someone had a specific question, which I've done forgot. But if you guys want to call in, the number is area code 864-327-9373. And I'll put it in the chat as well. That's 864-327-9373. And if you're a telemarketer, then prepare to be forced to hang up on me. But yeah, so Prey 3 looks pretty good, though. I don't know if I'd spend money on it, and I'm pretty sure my computer couldn't. Yeah, first caller already, so let me grab this. Uno momento. And if you guys don't mind, while I've got this call going, if you could please not call in until this one's over. Hi, this is TheMorgile. What's up?
How you doing, man?
Good, good. How you doing?
Cool, man. So I think I have definitive proof that the Earth cannot be infinite.
Okay.
Okay, so hear me out on this one. So, like, when you're talking to a ball earther, like as a flat earther, you're talking to a ball earther, and you tell them, you give them the rundown of all the facts, like how the moon landing is fake, all the pictures of Earth, the composite, and like the basic, facts about how Earth cannot be round, and then they say, well, they say, oh yeah, what is the reason they would lie about the ball Earth? And then you say, which I think is the most, the best response to that. They say, as a flat earther says, well, if you're a spinning ball, an infinitesimally small, speck of dust, in an infinite universe, this is basically just espousing like nihilism to the nth degree. Like, it's just, you're meaningless, you're worthless. There's infinite copies of you. There's, like, I can scratch my back right now. That means there's a copy of me who scratches, his head and this and that. It's just that's ridiculous at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, by people saying that the Earth is infinite and that the infinite, puddles everywhere, that's the same exact thing. It's just instead of you saying that the universe is infinite, you're saying that the land is infinite. Even if there's no other puddles out there, even if there's no infinite puddles and just the land is infinite, why would the creator make infinite land and then create a small, tiny, little circle that's getting infinitely smaller, infinitely fast? It just makes no sense.
Well, I don't know, like, why or who created it, but I think I see what you're saying. Here's my thing. Um, First of all, mathematicians and scientists and great minds have literally driven themselves insane trying to quantify or define infinity, right? And I think that there are a couple of other contexts that we can use the idea of infinity. And me personally, I sort of break it down to the root words, just sort of infinite. So we don't know in terms of we cannot define where it ends. Now, in terms of the infinite space theory, yeah, they claim that the universe is ever expanding and essentially infinite. Now, in terms of the Earth, I think that there's really good evidence that the plane continues on long past where the south boundary is, if that makes sense. Because if you study telescopes facing south in the south, you'll notice that the stars do go underneath or appear to go underneath the horizon facing south in the far south. And so what that means is that those stars are probably several thousand miles south of you. If they're, because if your ground horizon is 3.5 miles away, the stars that appear to be right next to the horizon in that direction are probably thousands of miles away. So to me, that actually proves, and I think it really does prove that the plane at least continues on well beyond just the sort of south magnetic south, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I can agree to that, and that's kind of getting to my second point, how you were saying like people can't even really define infinite. That's because infinity is not a real thing. Infinity is a concept. So, like there's not one single human being on Earth that can demonstrate or prove that something is infinite. Like there's no way that you can't ever prove it. It's just it's a 100% and utter concept in the human mind that people think about. That's all it is. It's not a real thing that people can demonstrate. Like there's no example of anything that is infinite, right? Mm-hmm. So by people saying that the universe is infinite, that you can never prove that. And people saying that, what is that, YouTube, I don't want to promote his channel, and I completely disagree with a lot of things that he says. I agree with some of the things that he says, but a lot of other things I disagree. And he says, like, oh, well, I don't see a dome, therefore I think the Earth is infinite. That just makes no sense. How could you make that conclusion? Like, mm-hmm. So, by saying that the Earth is infinite, like, you can't never prove that. Like, if let's say we're traveling 99% the speed of infinity, what does that mean? You're going to see the ground in front of you being created, like, in front of you, like, just for no reason. The creator just creating more and more land for no reason. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all when you say the Earth is infinite. So, like, also, like, if I'm the creator, right, and I make an ant farm, right, why would I make infinite land for just a small group of ants? And if I have 1,000 ants in an ant colony, why would I make the land infinite if they're never ever going to see it, if they're never going to experience it, if they're never going to ever be able to explore it because they can't travel infinitely fast to do it, right? So that just a lot of things just go against this whole infinite plane thing that I don't agree with. That, but
well, and yeah, I mean,
say like like, oh well, then there must be an edge, right? It's like and I can agree to that also. Like then there must be an edge, right? But then that's how I kind of also lend create. But I never really lended credence to the barrier of like the dome or anything like that. But like if the Earth isn't infinite, then it kind of seems ridiculous to think that then if it's not infinite, then I could just step over the edge. Then what happens if you step over the edge? Do you fall? Do you float? So then there has to be like a barrier. Then
well, and see, that's where I disagree, because see, to me, the whole concept of space as we've thought of it as this sort of infinite omnidirectional space, that to me that's totally gone. That doesn't exist. And so, as far as I can tell, logically, I just don't see a point to where you travel in one direction or whatever, south, say, whichever way, and you just keep traveling, regardless of how fast. I just don't see that dropping off, stopping and dropping off into space, because what is the alternative? If the land plane, or if the physical plane ends, then there has to be either something beyond that in terms of space, or yeah, there would have to be like a.
It could just be like, how people say, like, like the younger centuries say, like, Lawrence Krauss says, like, oh, in the beginning of the universe, everything was compressed into a tiny, infinitesimal, tiny space where all matter was. And then people ask, what was outside that? And then he says, oh, nothing was outside that. Existence doesn't exist outside of that. And, you can kind of like, it makes no sense, but like, if there's a barrier, if there's something enclosed in it, maybe that the barrier between this is the physical universe that we're in right now is everything inside this enclosure. Let's just say that we're in, and everything outside of that is the other dimension. It's another dimension. It's the spiritual dimension. It's whatever you want to call it. Like, it's just something that is just completely abstract from what we're experiencing here.
Mm-hmm.
And that barrier is keeping us from. I mean, I don't think it's a physical barrier. Like, I don't know. Like, it could be anything. Like, but to say that it's infinite makes no sense. And then the only logical conclusion is to say that it is finite. If it's finite, then if there's no barrier, you would just be able to walk out off the edge, and that makes no sense either. So there would have to be something closing you in.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It is definitely a conundrum, and I think that using the term infinite sort of sparks curiosity, because we really don't know. And again, the only way that we're going to know for sure is if we really start exploring the true frontier, which is not space. Like they tried to brainwash our parents or some of y'all's grandparents into believing that space is the final frontier, like a la Star Trek. But really, space is just there is no such thing, as far as I'm concerned. And so we really need to be exploring the true final frontier, which is parallel to the ground. And until we do that pretty much in all directions, then technically, by one definition, it is infinite. It is not finite. We don't know where it ends. We don't know. I mean, we know that it's flat, and we know that it's not a ball. We know that it's stationary. It's not spinning. It's not orbiting. But we really don't know what the extent of the physical plane is. But I mean, I've seen enough evidence to know for sure that the Earth doesn't just stop somewhere south, within 100 or 200 miles south of the south magnetic area.
I can believe that there's other land masses out there, and there's other continents, whatever like that. But like, I just can't believe that it just goes on for infinity. Like, it just, because it's the same illogical thing to say that the universe is infinite. It's the same thing to say that the Earth is infinite. And the same proofs that you would have to disprove the universe is infinite, you can just simply apply those to the Earth being infinite, and it still makes no sense. Like, because infinity is just a concept. Like, we can't prove infinity. There's nothing on Earth that we can prove that goes on for infinity. So let's say that the Earth, the very Earth, is infinite, and you can never prove that. Like I can understand the concept of it, but it's just a concept. Like, you can't. Like, things when we can't prove things, like, obviously we don't have the means to go on an airplane and spend $20,000 to go to the edge of the Earth, whatever it is. Like, everything is theoretical at that point. So we have to go with what is the most rational, what is the most pragmatic on the way of thinking. Like, what is the Earth that we're in? And to me, I think infinity just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, and right now, honestly, nobody knows. Nobody can say for sure whether the Earth plane stops at some point or whether it continues on. I mean, really, nobody knows for sure. And my position is it could be anywhere in between infinity and anything, south of the 90-degree south latitude. And other than that, that's as far as I'm going to go, because frankly, I mean, I've never even left the United States. I've certainly never been to the Antarctic nor the Arctic. And so, I have my theories, and I can use my logic, And to me, the whole sort of biblical domed flat area was the original psyop to convince people that we're trapped here. That this is just my opinion. You know, I'm not saying that this is exactly the case or not, but my opinion is that prior to the ball, they had to the powers that be, that the Vatican and religion and royalty were certainly not separated for most of history, and so there were theological sort of boundaries where, you know, either that people thought they would fall off, or if you look at the biblical description, you have a dome, which in terms of Roman Catholicism, the whole thing of firmament was just mistranslation of the word that meant expanse. And so this whole idea of a glass dome that covers the entire earth, to me, was the original psyop in order to convince people that there's no point in trying to escape. And the ball is sort of like that 2.0. It's much more brilliant because there's no physical boundary, because I guess they figured, well, hey, technology is getting to the point to where people may be able to go check for this, check for this glass dome. And if they don't find it, then our whole little story's screwed. And so really, a lot of people don't know this, but it was the Jesuits and the Catholic Church who were some of the very first proponents for the spherical Earth model en masse. And they were sort of the ones that dictated it through like almost royal or pontifical decree, that the whole ball earth thing. And that traps us here even more perfectly, because even if you can go south of the South Pole in their little model, you're going to wind up back on the other side of the earth. So there's no point in even trying to find any boundary, because you won't find one. And so that's, to me, the lie has sort of evolved in order to keep people in this little realm. And, whether it's infinite or not, I think, I don't know. I just tend to believe that there are probably other realms similar to ours beyond the known Earth. And, you can call that infinite, or you can call that extra land, or whatever. But obviously, we're never going to prove that it's infinite. But all we can ever do is try to disprove that it's infinite by, exploring. That's the only way. And the only way that infinite plane will ever be disproven is if somebody finds an edge or a barrier. And up to this point, that hasn't happened. So we're still sort of stuck somewhere between a boundary and infinity, right?
I think how some of the presidents go to Antarctica, and what's his name, Buzz Aldrin goes to Antarctica, and the guy who founded NASA, Werner von Braun, they go to Antarctica. With all these very high level people that have enormous amount of power. I think they go into Antarctica as like a tourist destination, like for the elite. Like they get to go there and see the barrier. They get to go there and see the edge or something like that. They get then they go there and they touch it, whatever. Like yeah, you want to go see the barrier? Yeah, let's go. Yeah. And, why are they all going to Antarctica for if it's just a frozen wasteland? Like, it makes no sense to me. Like, there has to be something of huge importance there. Like, why are they all going there? There's got to be a reason. I mean, they can't just be going there just to go. Because it's freezing cold there. You have to wear this special equipment. You can't just want to go there. It's not like the Bahamas.
Yeah, it seems to me, and this is just my theory, but I don't know. I just tend to believe that certain elements of this world, whether it's governments or shadow governments or whatever, dark brotherhoods, whatever they may be, perhaps may have made contact with, extra. I guess you can still say extraterrestrial beings. I mean, not from other planets, but from other. Yeah, extra plane beings. I mean, it's possible, because in the last 100 years, we've seen just this huge advance in technology that's just unprecedented in history. And everything from planes to the internet, computers, and just wild things that people would have never.
Certain technology not progressing much, like cars. like 100 years, we're still, running on gas and all that stuff. So, and other technologies that, other technologies are getting progressing, like really fast. So,
yeah.
I think that they kind of hide certain technologies and they release other technologies for us because they already know what the consequences are. I don't know. But I have another question about the moon. If you don't mind, I don't really want to take up too much time and I have other callers, but
sure.
I have a really cool question about the moon. Okay, so let's say if I'm in New York, I asked to another live stream and they really didn't have as much of an answer. And all of their answers were really cop out type answers. I don't really like those types of answers. So let's see if you have a better answer. So if I'm in New York, right, which I am, I guess my accent. So I'm in New York and I look at the moon, right? Let's say I need to look south at the moon, right? And let's say someone's in Florida and they have to look north to see the moon, right? So that means one of us is looking at one side of the moon and the other person in Florida is looking at the other side of the moon. But how come we will both see the same exact image of the moon? Is it the same way, the same the big round part on the left side? Let's just say, for example, we both see that same exact side of the moon. See, to me, that makes no sense at all. And then what they say is oh, well, it's a hologram. Holograms require projectors. The holograms are a very relatively recent technology that it makes no sense. Who's controlling the projector for the moon? The Freemasons. It's ridiculous. I don't want to hear oh, it's a hologram, or it's not a physical object, or this and that. Those just sound like really cop-out type answers.
Right. Well, and the best...
Glass is a physical object, right? But we can see right through glass. Plastic is a physical object. We can see through plastic. We can see through water. There's things that we can see through that are physical that, you know what I mean?
Well, and yeah, and not to give a cop-out answer, but one of the best things about flat Earth is that we don't necessarily, and I don't want to have answers for everything unless I know something for sure. And frankly, celestial objects like the moon or whatever are not tangible. That you got to throw away whatever NASA's told you. For all we know, it's a sphere. For all we know, it's a disc, which I doubt. For all we know, it's made of cheese. I mean, we know very little about the moon. For I doubt that. I doubt that, and yeah, and me personally, I'm under the impression that the moon may be a sphere, and I'm also under the impression that the phases of the moon may actually be caused by reflected sunlight. And I know that there's a lot of flat earthers who think that the moon is a disk and it's self-luminous, and they may be right. But I've just, according to my research and conclusions, the moon very well may be spherical, and the phases very well may be, caused by the reflection of the sun. And with that being said, let's just, it is hard to explain, but I think a hologram is a bad word. A projection is a bad word. But when you're dealing with light waves, and mind you, the sunlight and the moonlight may not even be in the visible spectrum until it clashes or passes through a certain medium or layer of our atmosphere. And so just to give an example, if you've got like say a laser pointer or a flashlight, and you've got 3 or 4 or 5 panes of glass, laid out one in front of the other, and you shine that laser light through those 5 panes of glass, you may see 5 instances of that laser dot in each one of those pieces of glass, right? That doesn't mean that you're seeing the source light. It just means you're seeing a subjective rendering of that light source passing through medium that is making it visible to reflect off of, so that you can see it. And so, in terms of the moon, if it's a sphere that's well above us, that's well above these magnetic fields and layers of atmosphere, it's very possible that we could be seeing, and again, I don't want to say hologram or projection, but we could be seeing a subjective rendering of that light source, and the light source itself would be unseen, just due to the fact that we are very, very small, and the Earth itself is very, very big, and it's almost as if we are little tiny fish on the bottom of a giant fish pond or whatever, a fish tank. That's sort of how we see reality. And so if you were a little tiny fish in a big giant fish tank, and there was somebody, shining omnidirectional light towards your tank, you may think that that light source is right there at the edge of your tank, when in fact the light source may be 20 feet away. And so it's just, again, sort of coming back full circle. The best thing about being flat earthers, we don't have to have explanations for everything. Although a lot of people do, they will try to have explanations for everything. That's what's gotten us into this whole jam and trouble with the heliocentric model to begin with, is the theorists being so arrogant that they feel it beneath them to come up with anything less than a complete working model of everything in the universe, even if it means making wild guesses about things that we can't test or confirm. And so with all that sort of caveat being said, frankly, again, the moon is a secondary feature of the world. The world is flat and stationary with or without the moon. And to try and to try and have an explanation for the moon which is conducive to flat Earth and works in flat Earth, to me is irrelevant. And to me, it's perfectly legitimate to have the moon remain a mystery, as long as people, as well as the southern stars, as long as people understand that the Earth is flat and stationary, and anything, any celestial events or any celestial lights doing bizarre things probably has to do with our magnetic field and atmosphere. So hopefully that wasn't too much of a non-answer, but maybe that helps.
Yeah. The moon is definitely it's one of the most mysterious objects in the sky. And I'm actually a welder, so I have this really powerful dark shade on the welding helmet. So sometimes I go outside and I put my welding helmet on, and if you stare at the sun with the welding helmet on, all of that glare is just completely eliminated, and all you see is a perfect circle, just like an orb of energy. It looks so awesome.
Yeah.
You should definitely check that out. You can find Home Depot, buy cheap welding helmets, $10, $12. Make sure it's a 10 for people who are watching the stream also. Get a welding helmet, really cheap, either a 10 or a 12 shade. Put it on, look at the sun. It's just like a perfect orb of energy. It's just so cool.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. And another thing too, if you look at high altitude weather balloon footage of the sun, it loses that, because even if you got a pretty clear day, the sun is pretty well in circular. But I'm sure what you're talking about, it's even different. But in terms of high altitude weather balloon footage, if you watch the sun, it sort of loses that shape, and it becomes more of an abstract shape. And I'm just wondering what that would look like through that sort of, I guess it's like a diffraction lens or whatever the welding helmet is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Hey, listen, brother, thanks so much for calling in. It was awesome talking with you. And I'm going to wrap up this call, and I'll put out the number again in case anyone else wants to call in. And we'll probably be wrapping up pretty soon, but I'll probably take one or two more calls. But cheers, man. Thanks for calling. Good talking with you, brother.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. Take it easy.
Awesome.
Bye. All right, awesome call from my homeboy in New York. If anybody else had any questions or anything you wanted to talk about for a bit, you can give me a call. My phone has, I promise you, I tried to charge this phone all day, and it's still down to 1 bar. The number is 864-327-9373, and I'll put that in the chat. And if you guys could please, once somebody does call in, if you could please not call until I'm done with that call, because it'll, I've got call waiting on this silly phone. Please ban the fake Candy Franklin account. It's a blatant harassment. Which one is that? Is that the one that's called? I'm looking for her picture. I'm scrolling up. I don't see it. Oh, hey, what's up, IPS? See you out there in the chat. I didn't notice you were there. Hope you're doing well, buddy. Where is the fake Candy account? I don't see her at all. Maybe somebody banned her or it. Yeah, I'm like all the way up at the top. I can't find it. Sorry. Or was I looking at something really old? Wait a minute now. Somebody's saying that's the fake IPS. Hi, Hope King in Japan. Hello, hello, greetings. Konnichiwa. E's are really threes. Yeah. So Mario Andrio says the chemtrails are a means of bringing the law of perspective closer and hiding things that are in the distance. In essence, they are limiting our view on flat Earth. Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Well, we've been going on a couple hours now. I think I posted up the number. I'll post it again in case anyone wants to call in. It's 864-327-9373. And if I don't get a call in the next minute or two, I'll probably run. I am a little hungry. It's about 8:30 here. Wow, I started at 5:30. It's been going 3 hours already. Wow, that's amazing. I didn't seem like 3 hours to me. Wow, although I was a few minutes late. Exploration of fake space. John TheMorgile, do you think the elite creator religion to hide the secret cycle of time? Do you think the elite creator religion to hide the secret cycle of time? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Got a bud here. Yeah, I got the munchies a bit. I'm ready for din din. Yeah, hey Carl, no problem. Thanks for joining live. And yeah, dark matter is a bunch of BS. That's for sure. With that, if you guys haven't seen section 3 of the top 5 epic fails of Team Heliocentric, I just released it. Was it yesterday or the day before? It does sort of go off on a bit of a tangent, and it is kind of long, but you may find it interesting. It is informative about Mercury, and I talk about some other stuff that is sort of, indirectly related to flat Earth, or at least institutionalized deception. So with that being said, God bless you guys. Thanks. Whoop. Now there comes, this will be the last call, I reckon. Hang on, it says Swifty. John's Donkey Service, we haul ass.
Hey, right on, man. This is Joshua's Taxidermy. You kill him, we fill him.
What's up, buddy?
What's up, man? This is Authentic Intent. How you been, John?
I've been doing all right. How about yourself?
Last week here it's been raining here in Minnesota, so I haven't been able to get out and do any live streams with some students at the University of Minnesota kind of shaking things up down there, letting everybody know the Earth is flat and satellites don't exist.
Awesome. Awesome. And you said that was at the University of Arizona. Did I hear you right?
University of Minnesota, the Golden Gophers.
Oh, Minnesota. I'm sorry. Okay. Awesome. So how's that going?
It's been going really well. I try to do like 2-hour segments just to refresh the Facebook feed. But it's been going. I mean, you know, what do you expect from college kids? You're going to have, you know, most of the kids, they're not going to be really open-minded. They think I'm crazy, and they think that the thought of satellites not existing is pretty ludicrous to them. But I'm able to break it down and kind of just simplify it for everybody and have them question what it is that they're seeing in the sky and try to help them understand that what they're really seeing are just light, but they're not able to really identify what that light is, but they assume it's a satellite, right? So that's what it has to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, are you familiar with the channel Beyond the Imaginary Curve?
I have seen it. I'm subscribed. Actually, I haven't watched too much of that stuff, but what do you have to say?
Well, the reason I asked is because he goes on to college campuses and interviews, you know, students on and just sort of does. He's got a pretty good approach into talking about flat Earth, but he's over in Scotland. And what I noticed was that and I don't know. I mean, maybe he has to go through 100 outtakes before he gets one good interview. I don't know, but from what I gathered, the people over there, because again, I've never left the United States ever, but the people over there seem to be a little bit more approachable and a little bit more open-minded and not so completely indoctrinated as Americans. Anybody that's grown up in America knows that, you know, most Americans are very loving people, but they are also very set in their ways a lot of times, and they're very much indoctrinated and brainwashed by you know, just the onslaught of mainstream media and sort of federal curriculum that we've been, you know, dealing with since we were little kids. And you know, our culture just seems to produce people who would rather you know, respond to somebody like you know, with incredulity, whereas it seems like over in you know, overseas in Scotland, Europe, or wherever, it seems like people may be a little bit more open to it because the indoctrination's not so heavy. So I guess my point is that I'm not surprised that you've been sort of met with, you know, incredulity and maybe some people that are, you know, not exactly the sharpest knives in the drawer.
Yeah, when you were talking, I thought about tradition. It's very traditional for us to graduate this regular high school and then continue our education. And if you don't, you're actually, in the eyes of your family, particularly, a black sheep. And so if you're not trying to advance your education to make money, to then have a family, white picket fence, 2.1 children, and a golden retriever, then you're kind of put off to the side and you're not taken very seriously about anything that you want to do, particularly if you want to do, you know, YouTube stuff or independent stuff that goes actually against a lot of what we're taught in the first, you know, 19, 20 years of our existence. And so that's why, you know, these companies love to get kids young with cigarettes. You know, you guys were talking about how the cigarette prices have increased. No matter how much cigarette packs increase, though, there will always be a market because kids who started smoking when they were 14 or 15, they're lifers, you know. So it's a traditional thing, in my opinion, of just a circle. You know, you get lied to about the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus, and then, you know, you go through your other junior high stuff about the moon landing and you know, now we have 9/11. So people have opportunities to wake up, It's whether or not the feeling in their conscience draws them towards that. And for a lot of people, it doesn't. From what I've noticed, talking to college kids, is that they know what I'm implying. And they know that how hard it was when they, maybe left their Christian school when they graduated high school, They want to go out to the real world. And so anything that the real world, quote unquote, has to say about conspiracies and people who go against the grain, they immediately have a comeback for those people. And so those people make them feel uncomfortable. Like the people in this 167 people watching right now, all of us would make those people feel uncomfortable. So they have to draw in like-minded people, and you're not going to get any more like-minded than a public college.
Right.
They're paying for it. When you pay $20,000 or $30,000 a year, you're validating your education. It makes it more true. And it's for me to kind of throw a wrench in their ideas. It does. It makes them it's kind of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. When you found one that was an alien, they just screamed at you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the feeling that I get when I go to the college campus. Is they're very much like identifying me as the enemy, and they wish that they could get me back into the fold. Like, I get that feeling, but it's like, no, actually, I'm here to try to drag you out and unplug the back of your head.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, it's totally true. I agree. And, I went to college, starting, oh my goodness, almost 20 years ago, like 18 years ago. And I went to Shenandoah University up in Northern Virginia. I majored in guitar. I was a music major, but of course I still had to take, regular requisite classes or whatever, regular curriculum classes too, of course. But back then it doesn't seem like there was so much politically charged sort of like, I don't know, SJW sort of things going on campuses. But yeah, it seems like college campuses in the United States may not be such a great place to try to approach people with this subject, because you're right. Instead of having a rational conversation with you, at least, a lot of Americans, they will instead, like you said, try to sort of convince you to come back into their sort of realm of belief or whatever. What Dell does is he approaches them and sort of just asks them, do they know what cognitive dissonance is right off the bat? And if they don't know, he explains it to them. And then he goes, right into, sort of something very blunt and simple, like, I don't know, do you know how fast you're supposedly spinning right now? Right. And I don't know, I would definitely recommend watching some of his stuff on his the street interview stuff, because he really does a good job. But again, I think America is a different territory by design. Most of a lot of people that are now young adults were sort of raised by SpongeBob SquarePants and Walt Disney movies. That was sort of the babysitter in a lot of households all over the country. And, we can see the result of that. But yeah, good points, man. Definitely good points.
Yeah, I will definitely check him out, because I'm looking for, I do mine live on Facebook because I don't have enough subscribers on my channel. So if you want to, come on by, guys, and subscribe so I can do live on YouTube, right? But I don't have a computer that I can edit anything and make my videos, quote, more professional. I just do them raw. I just hit play and record on Facebook, and I'm just out there for 2 hours, a segment, and whatever happens, happens. I don't have, like I have a gimmick, if you want to call it that. I know, Dave Chappelle and all of the famous comedians of the past have a long-running script that they would go to all their different events, and it would all be the same jokes, but these are all people who had never heard it before. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now. If anybody has any more suggestions, I'd love to hear them, because my bit right now is just holding a sign that says satellites don't exist, and I just try to walk them through the CGI that's done with NASA, the pictures that we get of outer space, and I'd love to hear your ideas about what outer space is. For me, my opinion about outer space is it's water. And so the stars or the lights that we see in the sky are actually light energy in water. And that's why a lot of the stuff that we see looks like it's kind of fluidly moving through water. And whenever we see Jupiter, for example, it has those lines going across it. But we can't get any clearer picture until NASA steps in and says, okay, well, here's what Jupiter looks like. And then it's all CGI.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really try to, I don't want to sound condescending when I'm there. I feel very comfortable talking to people in the public about what I am confident about what I have come across in the last 18 months or so. I just got to a point where I couldn't talk to anybody about this at my job, and I was having issues with my boss lady, and I just had to quit on the spot. And then that next weekend happened to be the March for Fake Science here in St. Paul, and I did a whole thing there where I was holding a sign saying that if we landed on the moon, we would have a McDonald's on it by now. And
Right.
my point was to get people to laugh, and to get them to think. But when they would laugh and walk by, I would say, but you still believe we landed on the moon. Like, it's funny that we would have that corporate type of American feel, that we'd have a Starbucks down there and everything. But really think about it. It's been almost 50 years. And it doesn't seem like it's that far of a trip. And we were using Game Boy type technology where you could play Tetris on it, and we were able to go there and back.
Yeah.
And so I started that on that day, and it just really started to get a hold of me, where it was just like, I really want people on a face-to-face level to understand why I'm doing this. Because I would bet you, and I've said this to a lot of my interviewees, if you will, while I'm walking through the different streets or waiting for interactions, I would say to the people who are watching me on Facebook or watching me later, these are people who would never think to come to a Flat Earth Google Hangout on YouTube at 7:45 p.m. on Friday night.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm going at them at a different angle, getting them where they're at, face to face. And I think it's my thing. I'd love to hear some more opinions and some help and suggestions and stuff. But back to the whole space thing. What do you think outer space is and the stars and stuff?
Yeah. And what I'll do is, if you could just real quick mention your channel name again.
Yeah. Authentic Intent.
Authentic Intent. And someone in the chat had asked what's Dell's channel, and his is Beyond the Imaginary Curve. So those are those two. And yeah, what I'll do is I'm going to close out the phone now, and I will close this out on sort of answering your question about space.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Tom. Have a good rest of your weekend, man.
All right, man. Thanks for calling, and everybody out there, go ahead, go and be sure and check out his YouTube channel, Authentic Intent, and talk to you later, brother.
Thanks, sir.
All right, bye-bye. So yeah, the question he had was in terms of space, and I've heard people with different theories in terms of space being water. There's and I think a lot of that may stem from the whole Genesis account, separating the waters above from the waters below. Although the pictures from NASA, I really don't trust anything coming from NASA. And when you've got things like the lunar waves and the way that starlight seems to be, jiggly when you zoom in on it real close, that seems to have more to do with the atmosphere. Now, what's above the Kármán line, if you will? Well, I don't think it's a vacuum. We've got pretty good evidence that there are ionized plasma tubes running north and south in the lower magnetosphere, which could act as sort of a barrier. But I don't know. Space may be a liquid, or it may not be. I know that a lot of theorists prior to Einstein and relativity believed that there was some sort of a medium through which starlight traveled, like they called it the ether. But I don't know. I really don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. I don't even think NASA knows, because it seems like once their rockets get to a certain altitude, they have to level off and then go back down towards the ocean. And of course, globeheads claim that they're entering into their orbital pattern. They have to get to their orbital velocity, but it's fairly obvious that they're not going into orbit. They're just launching a giant giant bottle rocket off into the ocean. So I think it would be presumptuous of me to say this is what space is. I have some theories that I don't think that it's a liquid, but it may be. It seems to me it's not a vacuum either. It's just an absence of matter. Some people claim there's a physical dome firmament up there. I don't think that's necessarily the case either, but it's this sort of mystery that drives science, and it's this sort of mystery that drives progress, and it drives people to try to further answer these questions. And frankly, space, I don't think it's an infinite explosion. I think that's totally wrong. The Big Bang couldn't possibly have occurred knowing full well that the Earth is a motionless fixed plane. So, the two are sort of mutually exclusive. And with that being said, it appears that the stars and the celestial objects are merely secondary, tiny little features compared to the Earth plane itself. And for all we know, there may be other realms on the physical plane that house their own little solar systems with their own little stars and constellations and whatnot. You never know. Christians say that God created heaven and earth. And I don't think that we're in any sort of position to say that God could only create one earth realm. And in fact, Christ himself said that his Father's kingdom is not of this world, although, of course, that could be allegorical. It could be, extra dimensional, or it could be very much a physical thing. Who knows? But hopefully that answered the question. I know some of these seem sort of evasive, but quite frankly, I would much rather say I don't know to something than to make something up and then force all generations of toddlers to believe it. Right? So with that, I want to thank everybody out there for hanging out and watching. It was a real treat hanging out, talking with you guys, getting a chance to interact a little bit. If you haven't seen section 3 of the top 5 epic fails of Team Heliocentric, check that out. And really, God bless y'all. Y'all, thanks for watching, hanging out. Spread the word, spread the world, and peace. Is that her father is some sort of high up general in the Taiwanese army or something? I don't know. Could just be a rumor, but I did watch a video, or a portion of a video, where Eric, she was teaching him what's that martial arts, whatever it's called, Wing Chun, and she was kicking his ass. So I don't know. No, She looked pretty good though with the whole sticky hands things, but no, I don't know. I've heard people say that he did. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. I think that a lot of his videos are good in terms of flat Earth, but I also think that he's done certain things that are a net negative for the flat Earth movement. So, just to give you an example, you know, the whole Hitler thing. Love him or hate him, you know, I'm not gonna sit here and express my feelings one way or another for Hitler, but there is certainly a social stigma against Nazism and against Hitler, and so if you are a very vocal proponent for flat Earth, probably the most popular flat earther, and you tie that to Nazism and Hitler, then bear with me one second. I've got a person in my face trying to get my attention. Hang on. So anyway, the point that I was trying to make is that you know, if people like, okay, the Eddie Bravo interview, right? Um, if people go and have Eric on their show and he does a great job talking flat Earth, the next thing that people are going to realize is that he's essentially a neo-Nazi, for lack of a better term, and what that does is it discredits. Hang, sorry, I'm live on the air, guys, and I've got someone in here that refuses to leave me at my peace. So, getting my train of thought back, it's a net negative when people, and again, whether you love Hitler or hate him, if people realize that you're a Hitler supporter and bake Hitler birthday cakes, then what's going to happen is all flat earthers are sort of subconsciously going to be lumped in as, you know, Jew hating, Hitler loving neo Nazis. And, you know, as much great work as one may do for flat Earth, that sort of thing just seems to discredit the movement. And you know, there's other things about Hitler and World War II that, you know, are very controversial. I mean, it is a controversial subject, and nobody knows. So you know, if you map this out, it becomes clear that something's wrong here with the heliocentric model. And I haven't heard any arguments against that. You know how usually if you've got a flat Earth argument, you'll get 100 trolls arguing against it, right? And some of their arguments make more sense than others. But in terms of the moon being where it shouldn't, I haven't really heard any arguments against that. So I think that's a really, really good one. And it's something that, you know, I mean, it doesn't happen every full moon or every crescent moon, but it happens frequently enough to where, you know, it's physical evidence that we can point to and show people, hey, explain this in your model. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat here sometimes. But yeah, so the moon is another one of those really just excellent indicators of how this whole thing is wrong. And you know, you'd think that astronomers would have figured this thing out by now, you know, that sort of thing, in terms of the phases of the moon or the full moon during the day. But I think that the reason that they never did figure that sort of thing out is because, frankly, they weren't doing their job and they weren't trying to falsify the heliocentric model, because frankly, that's what the scientific method involves, is trying to debunk or falsify given models or theoretical models of things, right? And I've said this before, but the process of elimination is probably the best method to discerning the truth. And so if you can eliminate some model or some theoretical idea as incorrect, then you've eliminated, a falsity, and you can sort of focus on other things. But again, astronomers and astrophysicists haven't been doing that. They've been, again, sort of indoctrinated in this religion that is not to be questioned, and they go from there, never thinking to measure for curvature for one thing, and never thinking to measure for the supersonic axial rotation we're supposedly experiencing all the time. And yeah, it's impossible to remain a globe earther once you start to consider these facts. I think I noticed a question, how did the craters happen, and why are they all at 90 degrees? Yeah, that's a good question. And one thing, this was brought up in zetetic astronomy too a long time ago, that we assume that the moon is covered in craters just because it does look sort of, like the surface isn't 100% homogeneous or uniform, and it appears to have craters and things like that, and even with the naked eye, but we really don't know that those are craters. Of course, NASA shows us images of fake images of their little model moon or whatever from the 1960s and 70s missions. And yeah, there's lots of craters on the moon. But I don't think that we can use that video evidence from anything from NASA, really. However, assuming a heliocentric model for argument's sake, and assuming the moon does have craters for argument's sake, it really doesn't make any sense, because if well, for one thing, the face of the moon that we always see, that apparently has most of the craters, because the dark side of the moon, the back half of the moon, appears to be relatively untouched by craters. And so, again, thinking in heliocentric terms, the Earth should act as sort of a meteorite or meteor or asteroid magnet comparatively to the moon, because the Earth is, allegedly so much larger and more massive and gravitationally rich than the moon, theoretically. Then technically, yeah, we should have been right in the pathway of those craters that hit the quote unquote light side of the moon. So it really doesn't make sense in a heliocentric model. Now, I don't claim to know what's on the moon, and it may or may not be craters, but the fact that we do see craters or quote unquote craters on the light side of the moon, to me, is yet again another good piece of evidence against the heliocentric premise, because yeah, that any crater that's hitting that side of the moon would have had to go well, straight through the Earth first, either that or gone above and around the Earth without being sucked into the Earth's quote unquote gravitational field. So yeah, it's a good question, and I think that it is it's just another one of those just common sense pieces of evidence against the team heliocentric. And that seems to be the case with everything that you look at. Every last piece of evidence that you look at really does jive with the heliocentric model, and I'm sorry, it really does jive with the flat Earth reality, and doesn't make any sense with the heliocentric model in mind. Oh, it looks like somebody used the super chat. Thank you so much to Truth Seeker. That was very, very much appreciated, sir. So I'm looking back to the chat. Oh, hey, Kristen Wolf. Long time no see. Hello. Flat Earth A-hole had debunking moon craters as creators video. That was pretty good. Yeah, I think I saw that, unless it was very, very recent. I watch a lot of FEA stuff. He does great work. Is Eric Dubé gay? I don't know. I don't think so. He seems to have a relationship with his girlfriend over there in Thailand. I have heard rumors, and I'm not one for rumor mills, but I've heard rumors. Check, check. Microphone check. We are live and giving everyone a chance to pile in. Microphone check. Hello, everybody out there across the plane. All 6 of you watching so far. Hello, hello. I'll just give a couple minutes for more people to pop in. Looking at the chat. Hello, Candy, Joey, Lazy Boy, Joseph, Karen B, and all. Hello, hello, hello. I was just doing sort of a impromptu hangout, sort of like the one I did last time, where maybe do some interaction with the chat audience, and if I could find my phone, maybe take some calls. I'll probably keep this one relatively short, but just wanted to say hello to everyone and just really talk about whatever y'all want to talk about. I see. So who you said earlier, B.O.B. was on TMZ 2 days ago talking about flat Earth. He sucks at making points, but he's good at making music. I didn't see him on that show on TMZ, but yeah, some people are better at arguing for flat Earth than others, but I guess it's a good thing if he's at least raising awareness to it, right? I don't know. It's sort of like the basketball players when they came out as flat earthers, and then, or at least Shaquille O'Neal, and then said it was a big joke. I mean, even that, you know, I'm sure that hurt a lot of people's feelings. It didn't really surprise me, but at least him coming out and saying it originally, you know, perhaps brought some attention to it for at least a few people, you would think. So that could be good, but excuse me 1 second. I had to clear my throat. Hey, David Voy. Hey, everybody popping in. So let's see here. Anything anybody would like to talk about? Pretty much this is an open forum. Just wanted to chat with you guys and see if anybody has anything that they've got questions on, comments, anything that they want to talk about. I'm wide open and pretty much, you know, flat earth related stuff, obviously, but we can branch off into other hot potatoes. Yuck, yuck, yuck. So the last video that I just put out was section 3 of the top 5 reasons the heliocentric team sucks or whatever. But yeah, Mercury's a pretty good piece of evidence against the heliocentric model, of course, because well, it can be seen after sunset. I think that's a really interesting one, and I covered it in pretty good detail in this last video, and then way off into about an hour-long tangent about other things. But hey, you know me. Joey Style, what's next for Flat Earth, John Boy? See here. Well, what's next? Hopefully, it would be raising awareness. getting more people to think about this sort of thing, because I think that's the best part about it. Sphere or flat, this phenomenon, especially for the last couple of years, has gotten people to think about things and question reality, and start looking at things like, well, what is the curvature formula for the spherical Earth? Because you'd think that you'd think that we would have learned that sort of thing somewhere in our many, many years of education, even just the standard education, K through 12 or whatever. You really would. You'd think that that would be taught in some geometry course or some physics course, but no. I think they do mention, or it is mentioned throughout our education system, that we're supposedly spinning 1,000 miles an hour near the equator. I think they do own up to that bit of shenanigans, but in terms of at least the curvature, yeah, it's not really taught. So, I just think it's a good thing that people are getting into geometry and physics and questioning these things, even if they aren't coming up with the correct conclusion and becoming a flat earther. At least they're in the process of studying the world around them and trying to at least ask the questions. So that's beautiful, and hopefully that's what's next for flat Earth. So let's see here. Sorry, y'all, just reading through the chatio. I've got stuff in the way from Google. Okay. Talk about the moon. Yeah, I can talk about the moon a little bit. That was sort of the crux of the first part of the series, but the moon's probably one of the most obvious indicators of, again, this isn't necessarily proof of flat Earth, but it's absolute disproof of the heliocentric theory. When you've got the full moon in broad daylight, well, technically it should be under your feet, over almost a 250,000 miles under your feet through the Earth. And I've noticed a few times just in the last couple of months where full moon is clearly, plainly visible way, way, way over the horizon, well after sunrise or well before sunset. And on the other end of that spectrum, you've got the crescent moons, which should strictly be on the day side of the Earth. You've got those often visible hours into the into the night.